Chapter 31. Potion Dunsmith stared at Klein with his grey eyes for a full minute without a word. Klein did not cower under the pressure of the silence and his gaze. He continued locking his eyes with Dun. You must understand that once you consume the potion, there will be no room for regret. Finally, Dun spoke again in a deep emotionless voice. Klein grinned and said, I know, but I respect the voice in me. First, Sleepless does not meet my requirements. It was the same for Spectator, which he heard from the Tarot Club based on description. He was unsure when he would come into contact with other Beyonder pathways. A slow remedy could not work for an urgent situation. Therefore, there was no need for him to wait. By the same logic, Corpse Collector was eliminated as well, leaving the two choices, Mystery Prior and Seer. Under the premise that potions of the same sequence were equally dangerous and him unable to obtain more information, as well as the fact that both Mystery Prior and Seer met his requirements, then regardless of whether Emperor Roselle was making a passing remark or if he really regretted not choosing Apprentice, Marauder, and Seer, it was enough to tip the balance in his heart. Furthermore, he could tell from the diary that as long as he figured out the true essence of digestion and acting, he would be able to avoid the negative effects the potion would bring to a significant extent. As for the murmurings and illusory enticements that could drive people to corruption and madness, he had already encountered that even without being a Beyonder. All right. Dun stood up and picked up his half-top hat. As he put it on, he said, Follow me down. Klein nodded and gave a gentleman's bow in gratitude. Tap, tap, tap. Both of them ventured down, their footsteps echoing through the silent and vast stairwell and passageway. Klein suddenly felt gripped by anxiety as he tried to find a topic of conversation. Captain, you mentioned that taking the potion would not directly give me the corresponding knowledge on mysticism, that I'll only have the qualifications to learn it. Then, where does the basic knowledge of mysticism come from? Did our predecessors risk their life for it or obtain it via other means? Every time he went underground, he would find the air especially fresh. Clearly, the ventilation was excellent. However, the occasional gust of wind made one shiver. Dun glanced at him, the darkness in his grey eyes appearing abnormally deep. He answered calmly, One of them is, as you said, experimentation, summarization, and enhancement. Second being bestowed by the gods. Third, the dangerous murmurs that others can't hear do not only growl and roar senselessly. At times, they will describe some matters regarding mysticism. But according to what I know, people who truly listen to the murmurs on a long-term basis have gone mad without exception. Or they would fall to corruption and become monsters. Of course, we must thank them. The notebooks they've left behind are precious treasures in the field of mysticism. Human lab rats? The underground passage's cold humidity made Klein shudder suddenly. Then, would my luck enhancement ritual, which turned into social network magic, eventually lead to similar effects due to the crazy and horrible murmurs? At the intersection, Dun did not proceed toward Cheney's gate, nor did he turn to the weapons, materials, and archives. Instead, he took Klein to the left and approached St. Selena Cathedral. Midway he stopped. It was unclear what he touched to open a secret door. This is our Nighthawk team's alchemy room. I will get old Neil to retrieve the seer potion formula and the corresponding materials from inside Cheney's gate. Hey, you have pretty good luck. The goddess has blessed you with her favor. We should still have the materials needed for 2 seer potions. If not, you would have to wait a long while. Dun pointed at the room behind the door. Wait in here. Later, watch old Neil concoct the potion. It's the most basic part of mysticism studies. Oh, do not randomly touch things in there. They are either very dangerous, expensive, or both. With that said, Dun added like before. All right, I forgot something again. Your becoming a Beyonder is a result of you having to face danger and the need to find the notebook. The meritorious deed was only a part of it. Therefore, you will not be a member of our team for the time being. You will still be a civilian staff member with a corresponding salary. You will still do what I instructed you to do previously. One additional thing is to learn more about mysticism with old Neil. You can arrange the time with him. All right. Other than feeling a little disgruntled by the lack of a pay rise, Klein was in full agreement with the rest. According to Dun, there was still the process of learning and grasping one's newfound powers after consuming the potion. If he were to become a formal member immediately and participate in paranormal missions, his death was certain. Dun turned around and walked 2 steps towards the intersection when he suddenly turned back. Another thing. I knew it. Klee was already used to the style of his captain. "We got something out of the secret order's actions," said Dunn with his usual expression. "It's unlikely they will provoke you in the near future, but don't be careless. It has to do with them being temporarily unable to confirm whether the Antigonus family's notebook is important to them. From what we discovered, they have preserved some of the ancient customs and we can confirm that they are related to the Solomon Empire and the corrupted nobles of that period." "Got it. Thanks, Captain," said Klee as he exhaled. This was also one of the reasons why he did not wish to wait, grasping the chance of becoming a Beyonder in such a hurry. As he watched Dunn leave and confirmed that he would not turn his head to say more, Klee slowly walked into the alchemy room. The room had long tables. There were test tubes, pipettes, scales and crucibles. It resembled a chemistry laboratory from his previous life. It was just more Spartan and ancient. Other than that, there was a huge cauldron, a dark wood ladle, a translucent crystal ball, and other items. The dark sacred emblem and other strange emblems were visible everywhere. They gave the room a tint of mystery. Klee looked around with interest, but he was not stupid enough to touch the things. After a while, he heard footsteps. Old Neil carried a tiny silver chest with complicated patterns. He was still wearing his unique classic black robe that seemed anachronistic, matched with a felt hat with a rounded edge of the same color. "Lad, I never expected you to choose Sia." Old Neil put down the chest and used his somewhat turbid red eyes size up Klee. "Your personality is just like mine when I was young. You just don't want to follow the masses." "Not bad. Light these few gas lamps and close the door." "All right." Klee tried hard not to tremble as he lit each gas lamp in the alchemy room. He made dim light rule over the place once again. Tack, tack, tack. The secret door was closed. He turned back to see the white-haired and deep-wrinkled old Neil using a bunch of strange tied tree branches to scrub the black cauldron. The concoction of a sequence potion is extremely simple, at least for sequence 7 and below. There's no need for a special flame or any additional ritual, much less an incantation. There's no need for one to participate in it spiritually. All one needs to do is go according to the formula's steps, add the precise amounts, and mix it. That will be all. Old Neil's wrinkles seemed to bloom from his smile. "For real?" Klee questioned in surprise. "This sounds as simple as my luck enhancement ritual. Man, it's quite frightening when you come to think of it. Perhaps it's a gift of the gods." "Praise the lady." Old Neil drew a haphazard circle over his chest. Following that, he opened the silver chest and pulled out goatskin parchment that exuded antiquity. The yellowish-brown goatskin unfurled inch by inch, revealing words on it. Klee looked from a distance and realized it was in Hermes, a language he was very familiar with. It was written in ink that resembled blood, seeming to still having its fluidity intact. But other than that, it did not seem extraordinary in any way. Seer, 100 milliliters of pure water, 13 drops of night vanilla liquids, 7 gold mint leaves. Klee silently recited the formula's content, but the rest of it was blocked by old Neil's wrist, preventing him from reading it. Pure water is water that is repeatedly distilled. Thankfully, I made some previously, so there's no need to waste time on it. While old Neil gave the introduction, he took a large sealed glass bottle from the table with great familiarity. He took off the stopper and poured about 100 milliliters of pure water into the cauldron without much thought. Klee did not dare ask, afraid he would affect old Neil's concoction. After all, he was the one drinking the potion. 13 drops of night vanilla juices. This can be extracted and stored as an essential oil ahead of time. Old Neil took out a tiny brown bottle from the silver chest and with a pipette and dripped 13 drops into the cauldron in a relaxed manner. A faint but easing fragrance emanated, making Klee feel an abnormal sense of peace. 7 gold mint leaves. Old Neil picked up a silver-patterned can and removed its lid. With his bare hands, he picked up a few leaves and scattered it into the cauldron. He caught a whiff of a fresh and stimulating scent. 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. Old Neil chuckled and looked at the potion formula on the goatskin. 3 drops of poison hemlock. This isn't something you should drink randomly. It can cause your entire body to numb to the point of death. In ancient times, it proved to be the best option for committing suicide. "It's not like I'm silly," Klee lampooned. Old Neil changed pipettes and dripped the poison hemlock into the cauldron. The mixture caused a strange smell that freshened one's mind. 9 grams of dragon bloodgrass powder. Old Neil took his time to reach his hand into the silver chest and pulled out a transparent test tube. There was some deep black powder inside. He used a beaker and a scale to measure 9 grams of powder and poured it into the cauldron. He then stirred the mixture twice with the dark wood ladle. The laid-back process to making the concoction made Klee a little worried. In fact, the materials from before were just supplemental. The exact amount doesn't really affect the final outcome. Should I put a little bit more? Old Neil made a joke. The last 2 is what's crucial. The amount can be slightly lowered, but it cannot be too far from the requirement, or your enhancement can fail. Oh, the quantity cannot be any more, even just by a bit. If so, you will have to be treated for mental problems. It's not impossible to die immediately. Klee immediately tensed up as he saw old Neil pull out a black glass bottle from the silver chest. Lavo squid's blood. 10 milliliters. This kind of squid is considered an extraordinary biological species. It is clearly mutated. It is covered in mystery. Its blood will rapidly break down under sunlight and lose its unique qualities. It has to be stored in opaque material. Old Neil's tone no longer sounded relaxed. He quickly and carefully retrieved 10 milliliters of blood with a test tube. The blood was blue like the sky. From time to time, it produced illusory bubbles as though it was connected to the spiritual world. After pouring the blood inside the test tube, the remaining drops are ignored as a form of precaution, whispered old Neil. The moment the blue blood entered the cauldron and made contact with the liquid from before, it produced bubbling sounds. The surrounding light was dyed with a light blue tinge, making Klee feel a strange sense of distance but also familiarity. It felt like the feeling of being in a mother's womb. It elevated a human's soul. The final item. Stellar Aqua Crystal. 50 grams. Old Neil's voice sounded in Klee's ears, jolting him awake as he looked at the table. In the old gentleman's hand was a piece of extremely pure crystal. Furthermore, the crystal appeared gelatinous, as though it was jelly from Earth. It lacked hardness. Under the blue light's illumination, it reflected bits of light as it seemed to contain a resplendent void of stars within. This is excellent material for the creation of divination crystals. Just a little less in consideration of any mistakes. As old Neil measured, he used a tiny patterned silver blade to extract the crystal. Pure water, night vanilla, gold mint leaves, poison hemlock juice, dragon bloodgrass, Lavo squid blood, and stellar aqua crystal make up a seer. At that moment, Klee could not help but recall the formula. With everything done, old Neil poured in a few blocks of stellar aqua crystal into the cauldron. Sizzle! Illusory fog instantly spewed forth, turning the alchemy room into a blur. Klee seemed to see a vast array of stars amid the fog, and felt like he was being observed by an invisible existence. A few seconds later, the fog dissipated. Old Neil used the darkwood ladle and scooped out some sticky dark blue liquid. It had strange characteristics. Gooey and inseparable. Not one bit was left in the black cauldron. The dark blue liquid was poured into an opaque cup before old Neil pointed at it. It's done, your seer potion. Chapter 32. Spirit Vision. Klee looked at dark blue gelatinous liquid, finding it hard to describe it as either a block or cup of liquid. He swallowed his saliva and said in great difficulty, "Am I to drink it just like that? Is there no need for any other preparations? Like a ritual, an incantation, or a prayer?" Old Neil acknowledged tersely before saying, "Preparation? There is. Get a cup of Intis Ormer grape wine, suck on a desi cigar, then whistle a relaxing tune, and dance a upbeat court dance. You can do a tap dance if you prefer that. Finally, play a round of Gwent cards." When he saw Klee's expression turn dumbfounded, old Neil laughed and summarized what he had just said. "If you feel nervous, you are quite humorous, aren't you?" The corners of Klee's mouth twitched as he resisted the urge to draw his gun. He put his cane down and extended his right hand. As though he held something heavy, he raised the opaque cup. The smell of the potion was faint and seemingly ethereal. "Lad, do not hesitate. The more you hesitate, the more nervous and afraid you will be. That will only affect the absorption that follows," said old Neil with his back facing Klee. It was as though he had said it casually. It was unknown when he arrived by the nearby water basin. He turned on the tap and washed his hands. Klee nodded silently and took a deep breath. Just like he was back when he was a child, he pinched his nose and drank it like medicine. He moved the opaque cup to his mouth and tipped his head, drinking it down with a gulp. A cool and smooth feeling quickly filled his oral cavity. It then flowed through his gullet and into his stomach. The sticky dark blue liquid seemed to grow out thin and long tentacles, bringing stimulation and coldness to every cell in Klein's body. He could not help but convulse as his vision rapidly went into a blur. All colors seemed to saturate. The reds were redder, the blues were bluer, and the blacks were blacker. The rich colors blended like an impressionist painting. Klein had seen such a scene before. It was back when he was questioned by the spirit medium, daily. At that moment, his vision became a blur, and although his mind felt light, it was clear. He felt like a castaway floating in the sea. Slowly, his surroundings turned discernible. All the colors returned to their original as a grayish and blurry fog emanated. Around him were bodies he found difficult to describe. There were transparent objects that did not seem to exist. Deep down, there were clean light clusters of different colors. The light seemed to possess life or contain immense knowledge. This is a little similar to what I saw during the luck enhancement ritual. As Klein instinctively looked down, he realized that he was still standing in his original spot, body convulsing. Suddenly, he came to a realization, causing his consciousness to sink abruptly and fuse with him. Boom! The fog quickly dissipated as the colors restored to normal. The bright, clear halo and the inexistent objects instantly vanished. The scene in the alchemy room returned to normal, but Klein felt his head swell. He felt like it was being yanked apart. Whatever he saw had countless afterimages. His ears were overwhelmed by an ethereal murmur. Hornasis. Phlegria. Hornasis. Phlegria. Hornasis. Phlegria. Klein felt a stabbing pain at his forehead as he quickly had thoughts of causing destruction to vent the discomfort in him. He frowned and hurriedly shook his head. Is your vision abnormal? Are you also hearing things you did not used to hear? Said old Neil, at his side with a concealed smile. Yes, Mr. Neil, what should I do? Klein tolerated the intense mania and asked. Old Neil chuckled. This is the resulting seepage of the potion's energy. You lack the means to control it. All right, do as I say. Think of an object in your mind, something common. Make it simple and easy. Klein quickly focused as he envisaged his own half-top hat woven from black silk. He recalled the feeling when he touched it and its exact shape. Place all your focus on it. Keep repeating that while creating the outlines. Does it feel a little better? Old Neil's voice penetrated into his mind like a serene song. Klein turned his focus bit by bit to the imagined top hat. He felt the murmur subside into a whisper before they vanished. The afterimages he saw also stacked upon one another and no longer appeared a blur. Much better, said Klein after calming his mind of chaotic emotions and having exhaled. He looked down at his body and discovered that nothing abnormal had happened. He moved his limbs and with half anticipation and half doubt, asking, I succeeded? I'm now considered a seer? Old Neil pulled out a mirror-like mercury plate and shoved it in front of him. Look at your eyes. Klein focused his gaze and saw that he was wearing a black top hat. His outlines stood out and his facial features looked normal. Apart from having his face covered in sweat, he did not seem different in any way. He followed old Neil's instruction and carefully looked at his eyes. Only then did he discover that his brown eyes had deepened quite significantly. It was so much deepened that it was like the night, one in complete darkness. It felt so deep that it could absorb the souls of others. Normally, dark brown pupils are easily recognized as black. Without looking very carefully, even Klein himself would not have noticed. This is a physical manifestation of the potion's powers. When you learn cogitation and how to converge your power, your eyes will return to normal. Old Neil smiled as he reached out his right hand. Congratulations, our new Beyonder, our seer. Thank you. Klein reached out his hand and shook it. Mr. Neil, when can I learn how to cogitate? You can learn it now. The initial steps of cogitation is relatively simple. It's even more so for Beyonders, said old Neil with a smile. Just now, producing an object in your mind to divert your attention and turning the energy seepage inwards is actually the first step to cogitation. Try doing it again. Klein closed his eyes and once again. His mind depicted the half-top hat. His concentration seemed to be more easily focused than before. Soon, random thoughts that surfaced would quickly vanish, leaving the hat's outline. Let your brain go somewhat blank. Exchange the object you imagined. Use something that does not exist in this world, an object you imagine completely out of thin air. You have to follow this rule. Only by doing so can you enter cogitation, only then can you exceed the concept of I. The limitless I will become one with the universe, giving you the ability to see and understand the truth. You will obtain knowledge only you yourself can understand. In the domain of mysticism studies, it's called a mystic experience, said old Neil using a pacifying tone. You just need to listen to the descriptions that I'll get to later. What's most important is to enter cogitation. Something that doesn't exist in this world. Imagine something completely out of thin air. Would things from Earth count? Klein attempted using an earthy green intercontinental missile he saw on television. He replaced the halved-top hat with this long and thick missile. However, regardless of how he outlined it or imagined it, he ultimately only ended up focusing his attention. It doesn't seem like it will work. Klein had no choice but to let his imagination run wild. He outlined a sphere of light and then many similar objects, gathering them together. The spheres of light stacked upon one another. It felt like an object of fantasy. Klein's thoughts gradually turned ethereal and afloat. His body and mind calmed down. The objects that did not seem to exist, the fog with the bright clusters of light, and the complex colors appeared once again. They floated in the sky in close reach. He extended his spirituality inch by inch as he looked down at them quietly. He sensed it and took it in. Very good. As expected of a seer. You entered cogitation very smoothly. You were just slightly worse than me back then. Slightly, said old Neil with a chuckle. In that case, I'll begin teaching you the most common, easiest to grasp, and most useful ability in the future in mysticism. Spirit vision. He switched off the gas lamps one after another, but opened the door to the alchemy room. It made the spot where Klein was dark, but not to the point of failing to make out silhouettes of objects. All right. In your present state, raise your hands and place them in front of your eyes. Your index fingers need to face each other, but they are not to touch. Open your eyes and keep them open until you are accustomed to the darkness. Klein completed each step according to old Neil's description. He saw the silhouettes of his fingers and the surrounding objects. Actually, you should be lying down to let your body be entirely relaxed. But since the effect of your cogitation is not bad, let's continue. Old Neil laughed. Focus your gaze on a spot behind your hands. It has to be behind. Then, slowly move your fingers and maintain the same pose without touching them. Also, do not pull them out of your sight. Klein calmly listened to it and cast his gaze at an empty spot behind his palms. He then slowly moved his index fingers within his vision. Once, twice, thrice. Suddenly, Klein saw a fiery red color in between his fingers. He let out a sound. You see color? That's right. That's the initial step to spirit vision. The color you see is your aura, said old Neil with a chuckle. No rush. Do it a few more times. After stabilizing it, look elsewhere. I'll also take this opportunity to explain to you the different meanings of the different colors. All right. Klein moved his fingers back and forth while having his vision trained on the fiery red. Old Neil thought for a moment before saying, to put it simply, the mainstream way of mysticism is to split non-physical parts of a human into 4 levels. At its core is the spirit body, which is also everyone's basic spirituality. There is a school of thought that believes all biological creatures have spirituality and have a spirit body. I'm not sure about anything else, but to mystery priors, the goal of cogitation and the method to increase our strength is directed toward the spirit body. Outside the spirit body is the astral projection. It is the means for the spirit body to communicate with the spirit world and with stellar space. It's considered an external manifestation of the spirit body. Besides, it will be directly related to your personal ambition and your prevailing emotions. The scenes you see after consuming the potion are scenes your astral projection sees when it wanders through the spirit world. That world does not obey the laws of the physical world. It involves exceeding the concept of I, the limitless I, and the universe's I. The past, present, and future might be stacked upon one another, and that is the source of divination. In the spirit world, what you see is just an imagery, a symbol. You have to interpret it to understand its actual meaning. Divination and many magic spells are cast through the astral projection. Do not mistake its relationship and differences with a spirit body. One is just a body and the other is for form. Klein continued looking at the aura in between his fingertips and made the simple conclusion. Further out will be the body of heart and mind. From this point forth it will combine with the physical body. It involves your brain and is an overall manifestation of your inferential abilities, your analytical abilities, your observational abilities, and identification abilities. Some potions will mainly raise this. Quite a number of magic spells target it as well. Old Neil explained in relatively great detail. The outermost layer is the ether body. It is a manifestation of your vital energies and physical form. The aura color you see is an external phenomenon of your ether body. In other words, apart from the spiritual bodies, ghosts, and specters you can see directly with spirit vision, it might also include certain existences that should not be seen. You can also see the ether bodies of others or their auras. From their thickness, brightness, and color, you can determine their health and emotional state. When your spirit vision improves and you grasp more mysticism knowledge, you will be able to discover even more details. You can even determine the lifespan of others. By the way, the emotional state I mentioned would also manifest itself because of your astral projection. When you go higher in sequence, your spirit vision will reach a relatively high stage. You can even be able to see someone else's astral projection. That way you will learn even more things. This is a level only seers and mystery priors can attain. Some fellows even claim that the strongest form of spirit vision allows one to see anything in any place, including the past and future. However, I'm skeptical about it. It sounds quite powerful. Klein was almost turning eager. Old Neil coughed and continued. Let's return to the ether body and the colors of the auras. Your limbs and parts that are required in motion will appear red. Your head and brain surface will appear as purple. Spots that excrete waste will appear orange. The digestion system will appear as yellow. The heart and other regulatory systems will appear green. Your throat and other parts of the nervous system will appear blue. An entirely balanced body will make a body be cloaked in white. That is a symbol of health. Once it turns dark or the thickness thins, the color will change. That indicates that the corresponding spot has turned problematic. It means it's in a state of exhaustion or illness. In addition, the inner layer of the astral projection represents prevailing emotions. Red means passion and excitement. Orange means warmth and satisfaction. Yellow means happiness and extroversion. Green means calm and peace. Blue means coldness and stillness that one is in thought. White means brightness, an eagerness to improve. Dark colors mean worry, sorrow, and silence. Purple means that spirituality is taking control of the lead, coldness, and estrangement. Klein silently memorized the information and stabilized his initial spirit vision. Good. You can look at other objects. Old Neil did not speak further as he nodded. Klein slowly turned his head and looked at Old Neil. Indeed, he saw different colors in different parts of his body. The aura was both thick and thin at different spots. The purple color at his head was brightest and his limbs' redness was relatively dark. The overall whiteness to his body was somewhat faded as well. Indeed, he's getting on in age. Klein made a silent comment to himself. Only with what he saw did he feel that he had become a beyonder. I am now a beyonder. He shifted his gaze and carefully sized up Old Neil when suddenly, he saw a translucent pair of cold and ruthless eyes without any brows in the void behind him. This nearly illusory eyes were staring at Old Neil intently, as well as him. This. Klein shuddered as he gaped and said, "You have a pair of eyes behind you." Old Neil was taken aback before he forced a smile. Ignore them. Chapter 33. Switch. The moment Old Neil finished his sentence, the illusory pair of eyes that lurked in the darkness behind him vanished. Even in his spirit vision state, Klein was no longer able to identify traces of its existence. This is a characteristic of ritualistic magic, explained Old Neil with a chuckle. Fascinating. Is spirit vision an enhanced version of yin-yang eyes? Klein felt like a child who had received a new toy. In excitement, he turned his gaze away and began observing every corner of the room. He wanted to see the differences of the alchemy room with and without the spirit vision. The outlines of the objects in the dark, such as the tables, test tubes, scales, cups, and cupboards, did not look different from how it looked like without spirit vision. They did not emit any lights or colors. Objects without lives do not have any spirituality? Klein mumbled to himself as he swept his gaze toward the silver chest. Suddenly, he saw a vibrancy of colors. The colors were as blue as the sky, as resplendent as the stars, or as crimson-red as burning flames. Materials from extraordinary beings still have some life in them, and, are still active? Even if the source is already dead? Klein deliberated on his words as he sought Old Neil's help. A precise description is that they have remnant spiritualities. It is one of the crucial points of a successful potion concoction. It is also one of the reasons why a beyonder will lose control. Dunn should have already informed you, explained old Neil frankly. He suddenly laughed, having recalled something. I remember that the formula of Corpse Collector requires a desiccated mature black-spotted frog. To consume that potion requires a lot of courage. Klein imagined a little and found it disgusting. He did not echo old Neil's words and turned his gaze to a dark area. However, there were no spiritual bodies or ghosts that he looked forward to seeing. Isn't it said that the world of spirits is everywhere? He asked out of curiosity. Old Neil chuckled tersely before saying, Punk, repeat after me. This is the headquarters of a Nighthawk squad. This is the ground beneath the church of the Evernight goddess. There are many Beyonders in here. Do you think we will allow spirits and souls to wander around in here? Furthermore, the spiritual world and spirit are two different concepts. Klein felt a little embarrassed as he turned his head, pretending to look at the faint light from the gas lamps at the entrance. I get it. While speaking, the area between his brows began to spasm. What's happening? Just as Klein turned around to ask, he suddenly saw a figure standing quietly by the door at the periphery of the light. It appeared human, though its aura's colors and the darkness blended perfectly, making it impossible to discern. Hiss! Klein felt a painful spasm at his glabella. His vision turned chaotic as he focused his attention again, but there was no formless figure. Strange. He turned around and asked, Mr. Neil, the spot in between my brows is a little painful from spasms. Haha, this is very common. You are a new Beyonder. Spirit vision places a great burden on your spirit body. Furthermore, it drains you constantly. Physical effects can be glabella spasms, headaches, oversensitivity, and minor bouts of hallucinations. And while viewing things with spirit vision, it's very easy to feel uncomfortable as a result of the unfamiliar surroundings. It's also very easy to have your emotions affected by others. These are things that require you to pay attention. You can become accustomed to and eliminate them with repeated practice. In addition, use it sparingly and end it in a timely fashion, answered old Neil with a smile. Why does it feel like you are delighted by this? Klein hurriedly asked for advice. Then, how do I exit from the state of having spirit vision? He had planned on mentioning the invisible figure he had seen, though when he heard of the minor bouts of hallucination among the symptoms, he struck that thought away. From the glabella spasm and headache, he could completely guess old Neil's answer. Like before, think of an item to divert your attention. It will bring you out of cogitation. Close your eyes and control your spirituality and repeatedly tell it to end. When you open your eyes again, you will discover that your spirit vision has ended. Old Neil described leisurely and when he was done, added, Of course, that is the most trivial and clumsy method. We can repeatedly hint to ourselves in cogitation from practice to affect our spirituality. That way you will have a simple switch. For instance, tapping at your glabella twice lightly would allow you easily activate spirit vision. Another 2 taps will simply end it. As for how you set it up, it depends on your habits and preferences. Got it. Klein thought for a moment and planned to imitate old Neil to use tapping his glabella twice as a switch for his spirit vision. Tapping once was easily mistaken as an instinctive knock to his head, and tapping thrice could be a waste of valuable time in dangerous situations. As for actions like snapping fingers, they were too attention-drawing. He eased his focus and imagined the stacked spheres of light and re-entered a state of cogitation. Under old Neil's guidance, after repeated hints and practice, he finally set up his switch. He clenched his fist slightly and used his index finger's joint to tap at his glabella twice. Immediately, there were glowing auras of differing thickness and colors appearing before his eyes. After another 2 taps, everything returned to normal. I've finally grasped it, he sighed with delight. Only then did he realize how exhausted he was, feeling like he could fall asleep at any time. His mind hurt as though he had stayed up for 3 nights. Old Neil said with a chuckle, We are not sleepless. Every practice and every time spirit vision is used excessively, you will need some sleep. You can now go back and have a good rest. In the afternoon, go to Iron Cross Street where Welch's place is and walk around. Try your best to find clues about the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. Tomorrow, I'll continue teaching you about mysticism. Of course, do not forget to read the historical documents. All right. Klein was in full agreement with old Neil's arrangements. He picked up his cane and left the alchemy room. He watched the door close as old Neil returned to the armory. Klein massaged his glabella and temples and with the help of his cane, sauntered up the stairwell. At that moment, Dunn Smith came from behind him with the corners of his lips hooked. With a deep gaze, he said, "I heard from old Neil that you are a very suitable candidate. Even without cogitation, you were able to use spirit vision." "Perhaps it's a unique trait of being a seer," replied Klee humbly. He guessed that Dunn had been watching the armory for old Neil. Dunn slowed down and went ahead of Klee a little. After a few seconds of silence, he turned around and said, "You have to remember that curiosity killed the cat. It can also kill Beyonders. Do not attempt to probe the murmurings you should not be listening or see existences you should not see." All right. Klee knew this was another reminder of how Beyonders lost control. After entering Blackthorn Security Company, he greeted Rosen, who obviously did not know that he had become a Beyonder. He slowly walked out the door and reached the streets where he took a trackless carriage to Daffodil Street. He nearly fell asleep on his return journey. It was still in the morning and the temperature was about 26 degrees Celsius. Klee pulled out a copper key from his waistband and opened the door to his home. There were still many items missing from his home. The living room and dining hall were still empty. Benson and Melissa had work or school, so they had both left early in the morning. Klee did not have the capacity to bother with anything else. He closed the door and briskly went to the second floor and entered the bookshelf-equipped bedroom that belonged to him. After taking off his tuxedo and hanging it on a clothing rack, he eagerly plunged into bed. The moment his head hit the pillow, he fell asleep. Klee was awoken by bright sunlight. He turned his head and slowly opened his eyes to discover the burning sun outside. What time is it? Did I miss the tarot club in the afternoon? He struggled to get up and walked to the clothing rack to take out his pocket watch from the pocket of the tuxedo's inner lining. Not only had he forgotten about the matter, he had forgotten to close the door to his bedroom and pulled the curtains to the oriel window. Pah! Klee pulled out the pocket watch and immediately felt relieved when he opened it. It was only slightly past noon. There was still a lot of time until the scheduled gathering at 3 in the afternoon. It was Monday, the day he would have a gathering with the Hanged Man and Justice. Klee went into thought as he tapped his glabella twice. The scene before him changed once again as he saw that his body had restored to a bright luster. He tapped twice again and stopped his spirit vision. Relaxed, he went to the first floor and boiled a kettle of water. He placed some inferior quality tea leaves and chewed on some rye bread dabbed in a little butter. Afterwards, Klee flipped through historical materials and original Klein's diary. He began revising and consolidating his knowledge. At 2:57 p.m., Klee closed his book and capped his fountain pen before pulling the curtains. Immediately following that, he locked the bedroom's door, making the room turn abnormally dark. He tapped his glabella twice and activated spirit vision to survey his surroundings. After confirming that there were no invisible spiritual bodies in his room, Klee stopped the spirit vision and took out his pocket watch to check the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. 1 minute before 3, he opened up his pace and like before, walked 4 steps in a counterclockwise manner in a squarish shape. He incanted in Chinese softly. Only this time, he did not prepare any staple food. Klee closed his eyes as he felt the back of his hands turn itchy. It felt like the 4 black dots forming a square was protruding and projecting something. Hysterical shouts and alluring murmurs began resounding, but Klee realized that the headache was not as bad as the first time. It was not that he was unaffected, but that he was doing his best to stop himself from listening. As a Beyonder, he had to have more self-control in such an environment. Soon, his body turned light as he floated up. He saw the grayish-white and blurry fog that emanated. Then he saw dark red stars. 2 of them had a minuscule connection with him with an abnormal sense of familiarity. Klee looked at his blurry self and muttered in confusion, "The astral projection that old Neil mentioned?" He remained calm for a few seconds and again transformed the opulent divine palace with the tall bronze table under the domed ceiling, as well as the 22 high-backed chairs that corresponded to the different constellations. Klee calmly walked to the seat of honor and made his body and face be immersed in thicker gray fog. He extended his right hand and tapped 2 familiar deep red stars and created a miraculous connection. Chapter 34. Advance payment in an underground basement without any windows. The burly Alger Wilson sat by a long table with various apparatuses and goatskin parchments on it. In front of him was a half-consumed candle. The dim, yellowish flames flickering made the shadows of the objects and table move like a mirage. Alger's hair was disheveled like seaweed with a deep blue color that resembled black. He wore a robe with lightning patterns embroidered on it. He clasped his hands with his thumbs facing each other while he focused on a bottle of black liquid to the left of the candle. Whoosh, 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 splash, splash, splash. The sound of tempestuous winds or the crashing of the sea waves howled from inside the sealed bottle. And in spots where the black ink did not sink, a faint fog would swirl. It was as though it grew eyes and a mouth. Alger cocked his head to glance at the clock hanging on the wall and watched the needle strike 3. He pressed down on his temple as his eyes turned dark. Fascinating colors surfaced from the various items on the table. At that moment, he discovered a deep red light appear like a tidal wave from nowhere, drowning him instantly. Backlund, Empress Burrow. Inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. After dismissing her dance teacher, Audrey locked the door and sat straight up in front of her dressing table. The sun outside was bright and gorgeous. There was a light brown notebook made of exquisite goat skin. It was flipped open to reveal that it was blank. To its right was a fountain pen with a golden tip and embedded rubies. Audrey did a test and made sure that she could pick up the fountain pen and write down the formula the moment she left the gathering. "I'm so looking forward to it." She inhaled to repress her excited emotions as she looked at the mirror with puckered lips. However, she did not see it reflect herself. Instead, a dark red and illusory beam burst out from her body. Above the gray fog stood a majestic divine hall that looked like a giant's residence. Dark red colors bloomed on both sides of the bronze table. They surged upwards like a fountain before pattering down. It carved 2 blurry figures who sat in the same spots as before. Audrey, with her soft blonde hair and tall slim build, instinctively looked towards the seat of honor. She saw the figure immersed in thick gray fog sitting back. One hand was flat, touching the table's side while the other hand was stroking his chin. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool," Audrey shouted with a cheery voice. Following that, she turned her head and looked at the person opposite her. With the same tone she said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. This lady sure is unsophisticated. Is she so sure that I'm a good person? Why isn't there any fear from her? Is she a noble lady who has been protected well?" Klein smiled and maintained his unfathomable image. "Good afternoon, Miss Justice." As he spoke, he lowered his head slightly and moved his left hand and tapped his glabella twice. What he saw changed instantly. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man emit the colors of their aura, and the surrounding gray fog and dark red stars remained the same. Nothing that seemingly did not exist or lustrous brilliances that possessed life was seen. He shifted his gaze and saw that Justice's aura perfectly matched the colors old Neil described. What was supposed to be red, purple, blue, or white were their respective colors. Furthermore, they maintained a lustrous brilliance and were of appropriate thickness. It was easy to tell that she was a vibrant young girl. The colors of her emotions are red and yellow. That's joy, zeal, and excitement. Klein made a judgment before casting his attention towards the Hanged Man. Like Justice, there was nothing special about the colors of the Hanged Man's aura. His emotions were blue mixed in with some orange. Calm, thoughtful, careful, and a little pleased? With this being his first attempt, Klein made a conclusion without much confidence. Just as he shifted his gaze away, he suddenly realized something strange. The aura of the Hanged Man's innermost layer was nearly of the same color. Klein focused his mind and took another careful look. He could faintly see that deep within the Hanged Man's ether body was a deep blue, akin to the sea. It felt like a tidal storm. His astral projection? Or should I say the surface of his astral projection? From the looks of it, he's really a beyonder, and one that's apparently stronger than old Neil. Klein analyzed as his mind was filled with questions. Not necessary. It might have to do with this being a unique environment. It's only because this is my home ground that I'm able to see these things that old Neil did not manifest. He turned his head toward Justice again and confirmed that it was a characteristic only Beyonders possessed. At that moment, Alger also completed his greetings. Audrey drew a light gasp as she asked in anticipation, "Mr. Hanged Man, did you receive the box of ghost shark blood?" Alger took a look at Klein and saw him tapping his glabella as though he was considering other matters. "Thank you very much. It perfectly met my expectations. I never expected you to send it to me so quickly." "The ghost shark blood is not the typical extraordinary creature," said Alger frankly. Audrey smiled humbly and said, "I'm very happy to see this outcome." As she loved anything to do with mystery from a young age, she had befriended those in aristocratic circles with similar interests. They have exchanged information, books, and rare artifacts among each other. But before this, None of them had ever obtained any supernatural power to become a real Beyonder. Instead, there were a few princes that hinted that they could gift them what they wanted if they became their princess consort. However, she had obtained the ghost shark blood directly from her family's vault. After all, the inventory only states 1 big bottle, without mentioning how many milliliters or how full it had to be. She believed that pouring a little bit of it would go unnoticed. Even if there was an accident and the matter was exposed, her parents were unlikely to pursue the matter. Alger looked deeply at the fool who was enveloped in fog before turning his head back with a smile. According to our agreement, I will tell you the formula to the potion, spectator. Let me prepare myself. All right. Begin. Audrey inhaled as she focused her full attention. Low-sequence potions are very easy to concoct. Just follow the order that I provide you. Do remember that there can be smaller quantities of the ingredients but not more. It would cause major problems. You should have heard about news of Beyonders losing control. I believe there's no need for me to repeat it. Alger first mentioned things to take note of. Audrey nodded gently and said, I understand completely. While she spoke, she turned her head to look at Mr. Fool. She wished to know if the mystery expert had anything to add. Unfortunately, the fool was sitting silently there like a statue. Alger thought for a moment before saying, having smaller quantities does not mean it should deviate by too much. If you do not have an assistant, I suggest you spend some time familiarizing yourself with chemistry experiment. I have a family tutor for such matters, answered Audrey without feeling the burden. After Alger mentioned the furthest extent of the deviation, he recited with great fluency, Spectator. Sequence 9 potion. 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence. 13 grams of cow teeth peonal powder. 7 petals of elf flowers. A matured manhal fish's eyeball. Add 35 milliliters of goat-horned black fish blood. The final 2 items are the main ingredients. They are extraordinary creatures from the sea. You have to be careful. All right. Audrey recalled and repeated. 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence. 13 grams of cow teeth. Peonal powder, reminded Alger. With his help, Audrey gradually and precisely memorized the formula's order. However, she appeared worried as she mumbled it again and again. Do you know about cogitation? When Alger saw Justice nod, he continued. I do not know how much you know about cogitation. Let me describe it once. After consuming the potion, quickly begin cogitation to control your spirituality and energy. Make sure to practice every day to truly grasp the powers of the potion. Dig out the meaning it symbolizes and even more of its mysteries. That way you can avoid the danger of losing control to the greatest extent. And the meaning of a potion mainly lies in its name, such as spectator. Klein silently listened to the conversation and had no plans on interrupting. All he did was secretly memorize and study, but when he heard that, he suddenly had a thought. Audrey listened to the hanged man's explanations attentively, and just as she was about to inquire about something more detailed, she suddenly heard the rapping sound on the table. She and Alger turned their heads and looked at the fool. They realized that the mysterious and mighty figure was tapping gently with his fingers. He said in a deep voice, It's not about grasping them, but rather digesting them. It's not about discovery, but rather acting. The name of a potion is not only symbolic, it's also imagery. It is the key to digesting. Audrey was dazed and confused from hearing that. She was not very clear on what Mr. Fool was trying to express. She subconsciously eyed the hanged man for a reaction from the corner of her eyes. She was surprised to see him jolt and freeze. It was as though an ordinary person had heard a loud and sudden clap of thunder. Digesting, acting. Digesting, acting. Digesting, acting, key. Alger repeated it again and again softly as though he had grasped a key concept or had succumbed to a strange curse. After a while, he raised his head and said with a hoarse voice, Thank you, Mr. Fool. Your hint is as valuable as my life. You have enlightened me greatly. Of course, I believe I have yet to fully understand or comprehend it. Klein maintained his mysterious and unfathomable image by saying with a smile, That was an advance payment. In fact, he did not truly understand the exact meaning of what was said. He was just certain that Emperor Roselle was more powerful than the typical Beyonder and stronger than the hanged man. Advance payment. Audrey looked at the hanged man's reaction and knew that the hint from before was precious. As she ruminated over it, she asked, Mr. Fool, what do you wish for us to do? Opposite to her, Alger said with a nod. What matter might you wish to entrust us with? Klee leaned back slightly as he glanced at the two of them before saying in a soft and pleasant voice, Collect Roselle Gustav's secret diary on my behalf, even if it's just one page of it. Chapter 35. Exchange of information. Roselle Gustav's secret diary? Emperor Roselle? Indeed. Only such matters are worth the concern of a mighty figure like Mr. Fool. Audrey was first taken aback before she realized that she found it nothing surprising. Rumor had it that Emperor Roselle had once seen the blasphemy slate. It was said that the secret cards he created hid the 22 paths of the divine. This was something every high-sequence beyonder would definitely pay attention to. Diary? That's a diary? Alger frowned slightly as he keenly noticed this tidbit. The item which Roselle Gustav had left behind had been described by Mr. Fool as a diary. How did he know? How did he determine it? Could he know the way to decipher Roselle's cryptic text? Faced with the hanged man's question and having obtained the desired effect, Klee leaned back into his chair and interlocked his hands. He answered in a relaxed manner, Let us first view it as a diary for now. He did not deny or confirm it. Audrey had heard the children of other nobles mention the matter. However, she had never really learned much of it. With her curiosity piqued, she asked, It said that Emperor Roselle's, diary was written in a cryptic language or symbols he invented. Yes, answered Alger simply. Some people believe that it is a unique set of symbols from mysticism. Others believe that it is a hieroglyph. But up to today, no one has found the correct way of deciphering it. At the very least, that's all I know. With that said, he turned his head at Klee in a bid to get some confirmation or show his suspicions. They are texts that have been passed down for generations, so are no longer in their original state. According to your line of thought, how can it be deciphered? Klee maintained his calm as he secretly gave a self-deprecating laugh. As for how to handle the symbols of mysticism, he instantly thought of a ridiculous and funny scene. Dressed in a black pointed hat and long robe, an evil mage pulls up his sleeve to reveal a symbol tattooed on his arm. It was said that this was a symbol with mysterious power left behind by Emperor Roselle. They were written in 2 blue, large simplified Chinese characters. Retarded Joker. The corners of Klee's mouth curved up slowly as he found himself in a good mood. After hearing the hanged man's description, Audrey said in a stumped manner, We can't understand the symbols or the words. Then, how are we to pass the information to you, Mr. Fool? Or are we to mail it somewhere? This is quite an important question. I do not have the means to accept an item secretly. Klee was in no hurry to answer. He repeatedly released his thumbs from his interlocked hands before tapping them back again. Soon, he thought of a solution. Since I can create a divine palace and table according to my wishes in here, would it be possible to project the content in the minds of others here? I'll give it a try. At that moment, Audrey and Alger saw Mr. Fool slowly sit up amid the thick grayish fog. Miss Justice, let us give it a try. Imagine a paragraph of text and give it the emotions of writing it with urgency. Yes, pick up the fountain pen beside you and write on the piece of paper. Before Klee finished his sentence, Audrey saw a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and a dark red fountain pen in front of her. She picked up the fountain pen both curiously and doubtfully. In accordance with the instructions, she imagined a poem Emperor Roselle once wrote. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? After scrutinizing the text, she picked up her fountain pen and imbued them with the desire of projecting them out. Klee sensed the emotions and using the fountain pen as a medium, he guided her. The moment Audrey landed her fountain pen, she saw a line appear on the goatskin parchment. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? Goddess, how fascinating! Audrey exclaimed in astonishment while feeling rueful. Following that, she looked at Klee with some fear. Mr. Fool, can you read what I'm thinking? No, I'm only guiding you. I simplified the process of writing for you and made it become an imprint. If you did not wish to express it, nothing would appear. Klee placated her with a low tone. Is that so? Then we can only memorize the symbols or the way the cryptic text looks like. Then, we can present it directly as we wish? Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she asked in enlightenment. Yes, Klee answered. That's not a bad method. Miss Justice, do not doubt your memory. After becoming a spectator, you will receive immense improvement in this aspect. Alger had watched the attempt from the side, fully coming to the realization that the fool was more powerful and mysterious than he imagined. As for his memory, He believed that the next advancement would improve it sufficiently. Regarding this, Audrey nodded in delight. You have delighted me with this reminder. Mr. Hanged Man, do you have any other guidance on spectators? With that said, she looked toward the seat of honor. Mr. Fool, I will work hard to complete your mission. I will do my best to gather more of Emperor Roselle's secret diary. I mentioned before that I'm a person who likes a fair and equal exchange. The advanced payment I gave is only equivalent to 2 pages of the diary for each person. If there are more, I will give additional in return, Klee said calmly, like he was an adult who did not take advantage of children. As for where the additional payment could come from, it was naturally from the newly acquired Emperor Roselle diary pages. This formed a virtuous cycle. You are truly a generous gentleman. Alger fell silent for a few seconds before bowing slightly with his hand by his chest. After the bow, he turned to Justice and said, Let me emphasize once more. A spectator will forever be a spectator. I know that many spectators enjoy imagining themselves to be the protagonist or some other character. As a result, they invest a lot of feelings into it, to the point of crying, laughing, raging and turning sorrowful because of the drama. However, that is not what a spectator should do. While faced with the various dramas of society and figures who knowingly or unknowingly act the role of particular characters, you have to maintain the attitude of being an absolute bystander. Only then can you calmly and objectively observe them. You will discover their habits, their tics from lying, or their scent of nervousness. From those minute clues, you can grasp their true thoughts. Believe me, everyone is different because of their emotions. They will secrete different things and different smells. However, only a real spectator can sniff it out. Once you invest too many of your emotions, your observation will be influenced. Your sensitivity towards the emotions of others will deviate. Audrey listened attentively as her eyes brightened gradually. It sounds really interesting. Klein's heart stirred when he heard that. The spectator potion's requirement when summarized seemed to be an absolutely objective and neutral spectator. In a particular sense it was equivalent to acting. Acting? Was this the acting which Emperor Roselle was referring to? Then I will have to act as a seer, and from there, digest the potion bit by bit? Just as Klee was immersing himself in thought, Alger finished explaining the demands he knew of a spectator. He sighed before saying, It seems like there's nothing else? Perhaps we can have a casual chat. We can talk about things happening around us. Perhaps it is something very normal to you, but in the ears of others, it might be a very important clue. Sure. Klee snapped back and nodded slightly. He was already planning to attempt to act as a seer. After all, it did not seem like there were any negative effects from doing so. Then, shall we begin with you, Mr. Hanged Man? Audrey agreed in excitement. Alger thought for a moment before saying, The infamous pirate who calls himself Lieutenant General Deweyville has begun his voyage to explore the eastern end of the Sonia Sea again. Oh, the owner of the Black Tulip? Returned Audrey with a question after some thought. Yes, Alger replied with a nod. I don't even know who that is. Klee listened silently while he pondered over the news he planned on sharing. It had to be something that did not expose him while also allowing him to gain feedback. Soon he decided. He maintained his unfathomable image as the fool and caressed the side of the bronze table with his fingers. According to what I know, the secret order has lost an Antigonus family notebook. This news was not only known by the Nighthawks from Tingen City. The secret order as well as Beyonders with close ties with them similarly knew. An Antigonus family notebook. Alger repeated before smiling with a shake of his head. I'm really curious as to what reaction the Church of the Evernight Goddess will have if they learn of it. Why would he mention the Church of the Evernight Goddess? Klee acutely sensed a problem, but it was not appropriate for him to ask. That would shatter his image as the mysterious and profound fool. At that moment, Audrey asked out of curiosity, Why are you curious? What sort of special reaction would the goddess's church have? Alger smiled and said, The Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I'm not really sure if it happened at the end of the fourth epoch or the early stages of the present epoch. This. Klein's pupils constricted as a chill suddenly swept through him. From the looks of it, the value the Nighthawks have placed on this Antigonus notebook far exceeds my imagination. The reason why they nominated me as a Beyonder, having some contribution and to prevent danger to me are likely negligible reasons, is that they wish for me to raise my spiritual sensitivity to aid them in finding the notebook. This was not kept from me by Captain. He had mentioned it, but I just didn't pay much attention to it. After hearing the hanged man's explanation, Audrey said with deep interest, "I never imagined that such a thing would happen. All right, my turn. Let me think of what I have to share." She cocked her head and held her head up with her hand before chuckling. "Yesterday, my etiquette teacher taught me how to faint elegantly without any faux pas. It's a practical skill used at social events to avoid awkward situations or nasty guys. Heh. I was just organizing my thoughts. What I really wanted to say is that ever since the failure of the battle on Balam's eastern shore, the king, premier, and gentlemen are under immense stress. They eagerly wish to change." Chapter 36. A simple question. While Audrey recalled the conversation between her father and elder brother about the situation, she put in her own words, "They believe that the government structure is too chaotic. Every election, if there is a change of the ruling party, there will be a change of personnel from top to bottom. It makes things a mess and lowers efficiency tremendously. Not only does it cause the battle loss, it also brings great inconvenience to the civilians." Klee knew very well that as there was no example to reference, the Lone Kingdom had yet to evolve into a system that examined public servants. The political situation was still in its preliminary stages. Therefore, after every election victory, many so-called positions would be awarded to members and supporters. Emperor Roselle not establishing such an institution in Intis does not match his personality. Could it be that he diverted his focus to other things later in life? When the hanged man, Alger, heard that, he interjected with a soft chuckle. "They believe? Then their beliefs are a little slow. Perhaps they will only feel the itch a year after they get bitten by black mosquitoes." Black mosquitoes were a type of creature that resided in the south of the Lone Kingdom. It was extremely venomous, and its venom made victims have the urge to rip apart their skin. Audrey extended her palm and covered her mouth. Ignoring the hanged man's mockery, she expressed the core information of what she said. "Unfortunately, they are temporarily unable to find a good solution to replace the system." Klee listened carefully and felt that the topic was in the domain of his expertise. He smiled faintly and said, "This is a simple problem. The Foodaholic Empire and the decadent countries that studied the Foodaholic Empire had very advanced experiences of success." "Simple?" Audrey returned with a question in puzzlement. Although her education did not include politics, she often heard from the discussions of her father, brother, and people around her. She had a sufficient understanding of similar matters. Klee felt as though he had returned to the message boards of yesteryear. "Composed," he said, "an examination, just like an entrance examination for college. Hold an exam that is open to the public. It can be split into 2 rounds or 3 rounds. Use the most objective method to select the elite." But Audrey knew what sort of objection this would entail. Before she had the chance to arrange her thoughts, Klee continued, "After which, use these elites to fill the positions of the cabinet, the county government, the city government, and the various towns. Yes, the positions that are directly handling matters, such as the secretary of the cabinet. Different positions should be given different requirements. The second or third rounds can be tested based on locale and region. Professional matters should be left to the professionals. As for political positions such as ministers, governors or mayors, they will be left to the parties that win the election. That is a slice of the pie they deserve." Alger, who lacked interest in such matters, unknowingly turned his head and listened carefully. Audrey frowned slightly as she fell into deep thought. There's no hurry in replacing everyone at once. The cabinet and various agencies in the civil service will be crippled if that happens. You can have an examination every year or every 3 years. They can be gradually replaced. Finally, in light of the kingdom's expansion and the salaried civil servants' resignations that will bring in vacancies, you can systematically allot spots." Klee fully expressed his talent as a keyboard politician. He then faced his palm outwards and said, "Such a design can bring the kingdom's insightful elites into the government. Regardless of the party in power or who the minister is, the civil service will allow the kingdom to maintain its basic and effective operations." Of course, a side effect was the birth of the undying devil that was bureaucracy. While considering the suggestion, Audrey asked doubtfully, "Are you implying that even if those ministers become monkeys, the effects would be insignificant?" "No," Alger interjected suddenly. "I believe that monkeys are a better choice than the present ministers." He paused before adding, "After all, monkeys only need to eat, sleep, and mate. They would not come up with foolish ideas and insist on brainless projects." "Mr. Hanged Man, it sounds you have quite a terrible superior." Klee sat at his seat of honor and shook his head in silent amusement. Audrey ruminated over the suggestion Mr. Fool had offered and after a while, said in surprise, "It sounds like it actually might work. It's a very simple but effective solution." She looked at Klee and sincerely marveled, "Mr. Fool, you must be an elderly person with outstanding intelligence who is very experienced in life." The corners of Klee's mouth twitched a little as he looked at the hanged man and Justice for a few silent seconds. "Let us end today's gathering here. If Miss Justice is able to influence her family and effect change on this matter, I can guide Benson ahead of time and give him a chance at becoming a civil servant." On careful thought, Benson was indeed suitable for such a career. However, it is unlikely Justice would take the initiative to do it. This is because the hanged man and I can easily find out which noble suggested it and basically guess her identity. Of course, she could do it through a roundabout manner secretly. "By your will." Audrey and Alger stood up together. Klee leaned back slightly and severed the connection. He saw Justice and the hanged man's illusory and blurry figures instantly shatter and dissipate. Above the grey fog, in the opulent palace where gods seemingly lived, he was the only one sitting silently at the head of the bronze table. Klee did not plunge into the grey fog like the other time to leave. This was because his mind was still energetic enough after becoming a Beyonder. The reason why he had ended the Tarot Club early was because he learned the true attitude the Nighthawks had towards the Antigonus notebook. He decided that he had to search for it seriously and not sleep all the way. Doing so would make Dunn Smith suspicious of his activities at home. Furthermore, he had benefited quite a lot this time. Klee sat on the high-backed chair at the head of the bronze table. His arms leaned on the armrest as he crossed his fingers while he observed the boundless grey fog carefully. He found the place serene as though no one had stepped into it for 10 million years. When he established the connection to summon the hanged man and Justice, he acutely noticed something. That was the fact that as a Beyonder himself, he had the ability to touch another dark red star. "Does this mean I can summon one more?" Klee recalled the feeling and muttered in confirmation. However, he did not have the urge to make an attempt since he did not know what the identity of the newcomer would be or what sort of attitude they would have. After all, not everyone was like Justice or the hanged man who had unique personalities that easily blended in and took whatever they needed. They even seemed willing to conceal matters. If he pulled someone like Dunn Smith, then the mysterious organization he had just established would instantly come under the watch of the church. As an evil organization's boss, his future would be worrying. Klee knew that the grey fog was special. He knew it was not something a Beyonder at Dunn Smith sequence could see through. But the problem was that since he had the powers of a Beyonder, he had to consider the existence of the gods. Klee had chosen to carefully believe that the 7 orthodox gods existed in reality. Of course, he was more tenable to the belief that these gods were just more powerful than high-sequence Beyonders. Furthermore, they were under strict limitations. At the very least, ever since the 5th epoch, apart from a few oracles, they have not appeared again. Forcefully pulling people here isn't a good thing. No one would wish to be pulled into mystery for some baffling reason. "Let's wait and see how things go in the future." Klee sighed and stood up. He released his spirituality and sensed his body's existence. Then, he began imitating the heavy feeling of rapidly plunging down. The scenes in front of him changed. The grey fog and dark red instantly departed him. Klee felt like he had torn through endless water membranes before ultimately seeing the real world, his room in darkness. This time, he was fully awake and seriously took in the entire experience. Strange. There are some differences between the grey fog and the spirit world. Klee moved his limbs and felt the existence of his body. After he seriously thought through the experience, he shook his head, walked to the desk and pulled open the curtains. Whoosh! The curtains were drawn as sunlight poured in, illuminating the room. As he looked at the street outside the oriel window and the pedestrians going back and forth, Klee took a deep breath and muttered silently, "It's time to go out and work. How should I act as a seer? It cannot be rushed. All I can do is use spirit vision now." Backlund. Empress Burrow. Audrey Hall looked at herself in the mirror. She saw her cheeks flushed red with excitement and her eyes, so bright that they would have daunted anyone from looking into them. She did not examine any of this as she hurriedly recalled. She picked up the ruby-studded fountain pen and wrote the formula to the spectator potion on the exquisite goatskin parchment. 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence. 13 grams of cow teeth pianol powder. 7 petals of elf flowers. A matured manhal fish's eyeball. 35 milliliters of goat-horned black fish blood. Phew! Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she read it a few times to confirm that she had not made any mistakes. She had the urge to dance again, but reminded herself to remain restrained. After some thought, she began writing various chemical names around the potion's formula. She then faked the page into complicated and messy chemistry. Yes, as long as one doesn't read it carefully, a person who flips through this randomly will not discover the details I have hidden in here. Excellent. Audrey praised herself and turned her mind towards the acquirement of the materials. I'll first search the few vaults we have. I'll then attempt to exchange for the missing parts with others. If I still can't gather them all, I can only seek help from the hanged man or the fool. What can I offer as payment? After some thought, Audrey closed the notebook and placed it on a tiny bookshelf. Following that, she briskly walked to the door and pulled it open. A golden retriever was sitting obediently outside. The corners of Audrey's mouth curled as she revealed a radiant smile. Susie, you completed the mission perfectly. In the serialized stories on the newspapers, detectives would often have a capable assistant. I think there should be a huge dog supporting a real spectator. In an underground basement lit only by a flickering candle, Alger Wilson raised his palm and looked at it carefully. After a long while, he let out a sigh. It's still that miraculous. I was unable to figure out any specific details at all. Despite having made sufficient preparations, he failed to understand how the fool had completed the summoning. He moved his gaze down and looked at the goatskin parchment on the table in front of him. At the title head of the yellowish-brown parchment, there was a Hermes sentence written in dark blue ink. 7. Seafarer. Chapter 37. The club under the scorching afternoon sun, Klein left his house. Since he had to walk all the way from Iron Cross Street to Welch's place, he wore a linen shirt instead of his formal attire of top hat and leather boots. He wore a matching brown coat, a round felt hat and a pair of old leather shoes. That way, he did not need to worry that the stench of his sweat would contaminate the rather expensive suit. As he went down Daffodil Street, he strolled toward Iron Cross Street. When he passed by the square around the corner, he subconsciously took a glance. The tents had already vanished. The circus troupe from before had left after finishing their performance. Klein originally imagined the animal trainer who had helped him tell his fortune to be a hidden expert. He believed she had purposely appeared to guide him after discovering something unique about him, and that she would meet him and provide hints for the future. However, none of that happened. She left for the next stop in the tour with the circus troupe. How can there be so many cliched tropes? Klein shook his head while grimacing a smile. He turned toward Iron Cross Street. Iron Cross Street was not characterized by just a single street. Like its name suggested, it was formed by two roads that crossed each other. With the intersection at its core, it was split into Left Street, Right Street, Upper Street, and Lower Street. Klein, Benson, and Melissa previously lived on Lower Street. However, the residents living at his former apartment and the surrounding area did not think of the area as Lower Street. Instead, they created the term Middle Street. By doing so, they made a clear difference between those staying there and the poor who lived 200 meters down the road. There, a bedroom was occupied by 5 or 6 people, and sometimes even up to 10. Klein walked along the periphery of Left Street as he let his mind wander. He recalled the Antigonus family's notebook and how it was missing. He thought of its importance to the Nighthawks and thought of the deaths that resulted from it. His heart slowly turned heavy as his face turned ashen. At that moment, a familiar voice sounded. Lad. Oh. Klein turned his head curiously and found himself by Smyron Bakery's entrance. Mrs. Wendy with a head of gray hair was greeting him with a wave and a warm smile. You don't look very happy? Wendy asked genially. Klein rubbed his face and said, a little. Regardless of your worries, tomorrow will always come, said Mrs. Wendy with a smile. Here, try out my newly created sweet iced tea. I'm not sure if it suits the palate of the locals. Locals? Aren't you one, Mrs. Smyron? Klein shook his head in amusement. Trying out something means it's free, right? Wendy Smyron raised her chin a little and said, You guessed right. I'm actually a Southerner. I came to Tingen with my husband, but that was more than 40 years ago. Heh. Back then, Benson was not born yet. Even your parents did not know each other. I have always been a little unaccustomed to the dietary preferences of Northerners, and I'm always missing my hometown's food. I miss pork sausages, potato bread, roasted pancakes, vegetables fried in lard, and roasted meat with specialty sauces. Oh, and I also miss sweet iced tea, Klee suffused a smile when he heard that. Mrs. Smyron, this sure is a topic that makes me hungry. But I feel a lot better. Thank you very much. Delicacies can always cure sorrow. Wendy handed him a cup of brownish-red liquid. This is sweet iced tea I made according to my memories. Try it and tell me if it's nice. After thanking her, Klee took a sip and found it resembling iced red tea from Earth. However, it was not as stimulating. The taste of tea was stronger and felt more refreshing. It instantly expelled the heat brought by the burning sun. It's excellent, he marveled. That puts me at ease. Wendy smiled with squinted eyes as she watched him finish the cup of tea in a genial manner. After chatting with Mrs. Smyron about his moving, Klee returned to the street he was most familiar with. There were far fewer street-side hawkers in the afternoon. They gathered again after 5:30. The ones that stayed behind looked drowsy and listless. The moment he entered the area, Klee's heart suddenly felt overwhelmed by darkness. His heart felt heavy, down, and gloomy for an inexplicable reason. What's happening? He sharply sensed something wrong about himself. He immediately stopped and observed his surroundings, but did not see anything strange. After some thought, Klee raised his hand and tapped his glabella like he was thinking. The extent of his vision immediately transformed. The auras of the hawkers and pedestrians all appeared. Before Klee could observe the colors of their health, his attention was pulled away by the colors that represented gloominess. He was unable to determine the exact thoughts of the observed, but the despondent, apathetic, and gloomy impression was deeply carved into his heart. As he surveyed the area, he realized that even the sun could not disperse those dark colors. It was a sense of gloom that tainted them from years of repression. Upon seeing this, Klee instantly understood the reason. Just as old Neil said, activating his spirit vision easily pulled him into unfamiliar environments and made him feel discomfort. It was also easy for himself to be affected by the emotions of others. A similar principle could be used on an ability like perception. This was an ability he obtained without additional practice after becoming a seer. It was a passive sense that could not be declined. It allowed him to directly sense the existence of anything abnormal. There was bound to be a level of interaction when perceiving things. Therefore, in the beyonder eyes of someone like a spirit medium, the intensity of everyone's perception is clear. It is like a fire in the night. Therefore, people with high perceptivity were naturally affected by the intense atmosphere of anything abnormal. It could only be repeatedly practiced to grasp, control, and adapt to such outcomes. Such a repressed color is probably formed over extended periods of time, right? Klee sighed as he shook his head, feeling somewhat affected. He tapped his glabella twice again and tried hard to converge his spirituality. Tap, tap, tap. Klee walked toward the apartment and sensed for any abnormal existences or tiny connections while also searching for the Antigonus family's notebook which he had hidden. The streets were the same as usual. There was filthy water and trash on the streets. It only cleared up when he reached the apartment's entrance. Klee pushed open the half-closed door and circled the first floor in the darkness that the sunlight could not reach. The wooden stairs creaked constantly as he went up them. The second floor was as dim as always. Klee released his perception and looked into the darkness. However, not only did he fail to discover any clues regarding his notebook, he even failed to see any invisible spiritual bodies. If it's so easy to encounter them, most ordinary people would not have already sensed the existence of extraordinary matters. Klee sighed in reflection. He had already understood that most spirits did not exist in the form of spiritual bodies, but in the form of spirituality. Only a spirit medium could effectively communicate with them. After circling the third floor once, Klee left the apartment and retraced his memory's footsteps towards Welch's place. He walked for a full hour but did not discover anything along the way. Standing outside the gardened bungalow, Klee looked at the building through the locked iron gates and mumbled to himself, "There's no need for me to search Welch's place, right? Captain and Madame Daly must have done a carpet search of the place. Besides, I don't have the key. They can't expect me to climb the walls, right? I'll try another path tomorrow. I've walked so much today, but there are no step counter rankings." While lampooning, Klee returned to the nearby district. He planned on taking a public carriage to Blackthorn Security Company to retrieve his daily allocation of 30 bullets. He needed to make use of his time and practice. A seer's lack of quick and effective offensive means could only be made up with his revolver and cane. The district around Welch's place was relatively clean. Shops with clean and bright windows lined the two sides of the street. At the turn of the street, Klee was just about to seek out the carriage stop when his gaze swept past a few signboards on the second floor. Harrods Department Store. Military Veterans Mess. Divination Club. Divination Club. Klee silently repeated the name and recalled that he had to act as a seer. Yes, I should take a look. And seek out new ideas. Amid his mixed thoughts, Klee went across the street and went to the second floor. He entered the main foyer to see a beautiful female attendant. The woman with coiled brownish-yellow hair sized up Klee before saying with a smile, "Sir, do you wish to have your fortune told, or do you wish to join our club?" "What are the conditions for entry?" asked Klee casually. The woman explained with great familiarity. "Fill in your particulars and pay an annual membership fee. The first year is £5 and subsequent years will be £1 a year. Don't worry, we are not like political or business clubs which allow entry through recommendations from formal members. Members can freely use the club's meeting room and various divination rooms and tools. They can enjoy the coffee and tea we provide and read the newspapers and magazines we subscribe for free. They can buy lunch, dinner, and alcoholic beverages at cost price, as well as education materials and materials needed for divination. In addition, we invite at least one famous fortune teller to lecture every month to answer any questions. Most importantly, you can find a bunch of friends with the same hobbies and have an exchange with them. It sounds pretty good, but I do not have the money." Klee gave a self-deprecating smile before asking, "Then what if I want my fortune told?" Chapter 38. Novice Hobbyist. Upon hearing Klee's question, the beautiful lady with elegantly tied-up brownish-yellow hair appeared to lose her patience. However, she maintained her smile and said, "Our members are free to do divination for others in the club. They also have their prices and we take a very tiny cut as a fee. If you wish to have your fortune told, you can take a look at this album. It has introductions and rates of the members who are willing to do divination for others. However, it's Monday afternoon, so most of our members are busy at work. We only have 5 here today." As she introduced the club, she invited Klee to have a seat on the sofa beside a window in the reception hall. Then, she flipped through the album and pointed out the present club members. Honas Vincent. Famous Tinjan fortune teller. The club's resident mentor. Good at various forms of divination. He charges 4 soli each time. It's really expensive. That's enough to feed Benson, Melissa, and me to 2 sumptuous dinners. Klee clicked his tongue silently and did not reply. When the woman saw this, she continued flipping the page and introducing one member after another. And the final one, Glassy. A member who joined the club this year. He is skilled in tarot divination. He charges 2 pence each time. "Sir, who do you plan on choosing?" Klee did not stand on ceremony and answered, "Mr. Glassy." The female attendant fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, "Sir, I have to remind you that Mr. Glassy is only considered a novice." "I understand. I will be responsible for my own decision." Klee nodded with a smile. "Then please follow me." The woman stood up and led Klee through a door beside the reception hall. It was not a very long corridor and an open meeting room was situated at its end. There was enough sunlight and it was equipped with tables and chairs. There were newspapers, magazines, and paper cards. A faint coffee aroma drifted out. About 2 rooms from the meeting room, the attendant gestured for Klee to stop. She sped up her pace and entered the room. She shouted gently, "Mr. Glassy, someone wishes for your divination." "Me?" A voice filled with surprise and doubt immediately sounded. Following that, there was the sound of a chair moving. "Yes, which divination room would you like to use?" replied the lady without any emotion. "Topaz room. I like Topaz." Glassy appeared by the meeting room's door and looked curiously at Klee, who was waiting not far away. He was a man in his 30s. His skin was slightly dark and his pupils were a dark green shade. Under his light yellow and soft hair, he was dressed in a white shirt and black vest. A monocle hung from his chest and he seemed to have a good disposition. The attendant did not say anything further as she opened the door to the Topaz room, which was next to the meeting room. The curtains inside were tightly shut, making it dim. It appeared that only by doing so would one gain revelations from the gods and spirits to obtain an accurate divination outcome. "Hello there. I'm Glassy. I never expected you to choose me for your divination." Glassy gave a gentleman's bow, briskly stepped into the room, and sat behind a long table. "Frankly, I'm only attempting divination for others. I do not have much experience. For now, I'm not a good fortune teller. You still have a chance for regret. After Klee returned the bow, he entered and closed the door behind him. By the light seeping through the curtains, he said with a smile, "You are a really honest man, but I'm someone who is very firm on his choices. Please have a seat." Glassy pointed at the seat in front of him and thought for a few seconds. Divination is my hobby. Heh. In life, one often receives guidance from the divine, but the ordinary person is unable to accurately understand the meaning. This is the reason why divination exists and also why I joined this club. In this aspect I still lack confidence. Let's make the divination that follows an exchange, a free exchange. How do you like my suggestion? I'll cover the fees the club requires. It's just a quarter pence. Klee did not agree or shake his head. Instead he smiled. From the looks of it, you have a pretty well-paying and decent job. While he said so, he leaned his body forward slightly. He held his forehead with his right fist and tapped at it twice. But that does not enhance the accuracy of my divination, answered Glassy humorously. Does your head hurt? Do you want to divine problems regarding health? A little. I wish to divine where an item is. Klee had already thought of an excuse as he slowly leaned back. In his eyes, Glassy's aura clearly presented itself. The orange colors by his lungs were dark and sparse. They even influenced the brightness in other areas. This is not a symptom of exhaustion. Klee nodded in an indiscernible manner. Are you searching for a lost item? Glassy thought for a few seconds before saying, Then let's do a simple determination. He pushed the neatly stacked tarot cards on the black table toward Klee. Calm down. Think of that item and ask yourself, can it still be found? While doing so, shuffle and cut the deck. All right. Klee actually did not remember what the ancient notebook looked like. All he could do was repeat the question to himself. Can the Antigonus family's notebook still be found? While he repeated the thought, he skillfully shuffled and cut the deck. Glassy picked the topmost card and pushed it in front of Klee. The card was facing down horizontally. Turn it clockwise until it sits vertical. Then flip it open. If the card is inverted, which means the picture on the card is facing away from you, it indicates that the item cannot be found. If the card is upright, then we can continue the divination and seek its actual location. Klee followed his instructions and turned the horizontal card vertical. He clasped the end of the tarot card and flipped it over. It was an inverted card. What a pity. Glassy sighed. Klee did not respond because his attention was focused on the tarot card in front of him. The inverted card's picture was dressed in gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress. The Fool. It's the Fool again? It can't be so coincidental, right? According to the Hanged Man and Old Neil, divination is the outcome of the communication of spirituality and the spirit world with a higher dimensional me. Tarot cards are only a convenient tool to read what the truth symbolizes. In theory, using any divination item doesn't matter as it doesn't affect the outcome. Klee frowned as he thought for a moment. Can it be divined whether the item is already in the hands of others? Of course. Follow the same procedure and do it again. Glassy nodded with rich interest. Klee shuffled and cut the deck while thinking of his question. He drew a card and placed it horizontally before turning it vertical clockwise. He finished all the preparations with a serious expression. Taking a deep breath, Klee reached out his hand and flipped over the tarot card. Please do not be the Fool again. While praying, he suddenly relaxed because the card was that of the Star and it was inverted. From the looks of it, the item has not been taken by others yet, interpreted Glassy with a smile. Klee nodded and raised his right hand. He tapped his glabella, looking as though he was deep in thought. Then, he took out 2 pennies with a dark copper luster from his pocket and pushed it towards Glassy. Didn't I say it was free? Glassy said with a frown. Klee laughed as he got up. This is the respect divination deserves. All right. Thank you for your generosity. Glassy stood up and reached out his hand. After shaking his hand, Klee took 2 steps back and turned around. He walked to the door and twisted the doorknob. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly turned his head and made a terse sound. Mr. Glassy, I suggest that you see a doctor as soon as possible. Focus on your lungs. Why? Asked Glassy in surprise. Are you cursing me because you aren't pleased with the divination results? Klee thought for a moment before saying, It's a symptom based on the color of your face. Your glabella seems dark. Glabella seems dark. It was the first time Glassy was hearing such a description. Klee did not explain further as he walked out the room with a smile. He closed the wooden door behind him. Is he an unlicensed doctor or a herbalist? Glassy shook his head, amused. He then picked up his monocle for divination. On careful look, he realized his glabella was indeed dark. But this was a problem of the environment. In the darkness due to the closed curtains, not only was his glabella dark, his entire face was shrouded in darkness. It's not a very likable joke. Glassy muttered. He worriedly divined his own health to make sure that everything was all right. After leaving the divination club, Klee had an additional plan for the future. It was to save as much money as possible to pay the annual fee to become a member of the club. After which, he could begin acting as a seer. As for why he did not choose to do it independently, it was because he temporarily lacked the resources and channels. He could not bring himself to stand on the streets as a hawker since he cared for his reputation. A few minutes later, the public carriage arrived. He spent 2 pence and reached Zutland Street, which was not very far off. He pushed open the door to Blackthorn Security Company, but did not see the familiar brown-haired girl. He only saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell with his poetic bearing behind the reception counter. Good afternoon. Where's Rosen? Klee asked after taking off his hat and bowing. Leonard smiled and pointed at the partition. It's her shift tonight at the armory. Without waiting for Klee to ask another question, Leonard said as though he was pondering over a matter. Klee, I have a question that has always puzzled me. What is it? Klee was puzzled. Leonard stood up and smilingly said with a relaxed tone. Why did Welch and Naya commit suicide on the spot while you returned home? It likely has to do with how the unknown existence made me take the Antigonus family's notebook away to hide it, answered Klee with the official surmise. Leonard paced around before turning to look straight into Klein's eyes. If your suicide was meant to silence you and wipe out any clues, why weren't you made to destroy the notebook there and then? Chapter 39. Interesting trick. In fact, I do not know if the notebook is destroyed or hidden. But by using backward reasoning, if it is to be destroyed, it could have been done on the spot. There was no need for me to take it away to carry out the destruction. Upon hearing Leonard's question, Klee instantly went into keyboard detective mode and said with a sigh, perhaps when Welch, Naya, and I made contact with the unknown existence, it enjoyed the sacrifice of life or wished for similar situations to continue. With the suicide definitely easily discoverable, I was made to take away the notebook to hide it so as to prepare for the existence's second round of entertainment. However, some mishap happened during the process and I failed to succeed in my suicide. This was a reasoned guess Klee made from his consumption of novels, movies, and TV dramas which involved cult sacrifices. As for the mishap that happened midway, he knew very well that it was due to the unexpected variable of him being a transmigrator. Quite a good explanation, but I believe there might be other possibilities. Welch's and Naya's suicide sacrifice might have made it possible for the unknown existence to descend on this world. Then, that notebook is a vessel or a breeding ground for evil. It made you take it away to hide it, worried that we would destroy it if we discovered its birth, before it became strong. Leonard Mitchell suggested another possibility. Having said that, he stared into Klein's eyes and smiled slightly. Of course, perhaps the notebook has been destroyed. The goal is to hide its content, to conceal the vessel or the brooding of evil. That way, there is a sufficient reason for your failed suicide. What does he mean? Is he suspecting me? Is he suspecting that the original Klein's body is a vessel or used for the brooding of evil? No, what he's being a vessel for is a transmigrator. Actually, brooding isn't a correct term. Klee was taken aback. While he secretly criticized the idea, he weighed his words. I will not try to defend myself since I've lost memories from that period. Be it Captain or Madame Daly, they have already confirmed that I'm fine. Your joke isn't funny. I'm only considering a possibility. It does not eliminate the blow the unknown existence encountered when it descended which caused your suicide to fail. We believe that the goddess will ultimately bless us. Leonard laughed as he changed the subject. Did you discover anything in the afternoon? After the conversation and the previous encounters, Klee was very wary of Leonard. He answered in a composed manner, no. I plan on trying a different route tomorrow afternoon. He pointed to the partition and said, I'll need to head to the armory to draw the bullets. The shooting club opened to 9 at night. After all, its availability increased only after many of its members got off work. May Goddess bless you. Leonard smiled as he gestured the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. He watched Klee pass through the partition and listened to his footsteps down the stairs. Leonard's smile gradually vanished as a look of doubt appeared in his green eyes. He whispered something with a displeased tone. Down the stairs, Klee followed the gas lamp-illuminated corridor to the armory and archives. The iron door was open and the brown-haired Rosen was standing in front of the table. She was chatting with a top hat-wearing middle-aged man with a thick black beard. "Good afternoon, no. Good evening. It's always night here. Klee, I heard from old Neil that you have become a Beyonder? It's called Seer?" Rosen turned her head and deluged him with her questions. She did not hide her curiosity and concern. Klee nodded with a smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Rosen. It's indeed always night here, but it makes one feel a sense of serenity. The description you gave wasn't accurate enough. It should be said that the sequence potion I consumed has the name Seer." "You still chose to become a Beyonder after all," Rosen said with a sigh as she fell into a deep thought. Klee looked at the middle-aged man beside her and asked politely, "You are? Another Nighthawk member or one of the other 2 civilian staff I have not met?" Rosen puckered her lips and said, "Brett. Our colleague. He wishes to change slots with me to free up the night after tomorrow. He plans on going to the theater in the North District with his wife to watch The Prideful One. It's to celebrate their 15th-year wedding anniversary. He's truly a romantic gentleman." Brett smiled as he extended his hand and said, "With Miss Rosen around, there's nothing that requires repeating. Hello, Klee. I never expected you to become a Beyonder so quickly. As for me, I might never have the courage." "Perhaps it's as the saying goes, the ignorant knows no fear," Klee said in a self-deprecating manner as he extended his hand to shake Brett's. "Me not having courage is not something bad," said Brett with a shake of his head. "A Beyonder once told me before his death to never probe the strange and dangerous matters. The less you know, the longer you live." At that moment Rosen interjected, "Klee, there's no need to mind it. I heard from old Neil that as a seer, you are used as support. It's relatively safe as long as you do not attempt to communicate with unknown existences. Why are you dressed in such clothes? It's so unbecoming of a gentleman. What are you here for?" "I'm here to draw my 30 bullets." Klee did not reply to Rosen's first question. He believed that the lady would quickly forget the matter. "All right." Rosen pointed at the table and said, "Brett, it's all yours. You should know where the keys and bullets are." "Oh, old Neil really is petty. He did not even leave his hand-ground coffee behind. He promised me that I could drink my fill today." She prattled on as Klee received the bullets. The duo left together and went their separate ways at Zutland Street. One took a public carriage home while the other walked into the shooting club. Bang, bang, bang. Klee repeated the process, gripping the gun, raising his arms, shooting, releasing the cylinder, ejecting the empty shells, and stuffing in rounds, again and again. He became familiar with the process and built it into his muscle memory. Of course, he had a few breaks in between to review and correct the process. After finishing his practice, Klee used the grounds to do various exercises like push-ups. He worked hard to train his body to improve his physique. Once everything was over, he sat in an untracked carriage home. Only then he realized it was nearing 7 and the sky was already dark. Just as Klee was planning to head to the market or streets to buy the ingredients for dinner, the door opened. Melissa had returned with her stationery-filled bag. Apart from that, she carried quite a lot of groceries. "I thought you and Benson would be home rather late. This morning, I took out one solely from the place you hide the money." Upon seeing her brother's questioning look, Melissa explained in her usual serious manner. "Since you took the money, why didn't you take the public carriage to school?" Klee had been reminded of the matter from the morning. Melissa said with a frown, "Why should I take a public carriage? It costs 4 pence to get to school. A return trip means 8 pence. Counting Benson and you, we will be spending 24 pence on transportation daily. That's a whole solely. In a week, yes, without counting Sunday, that's still 12 pence. It's almost equal to our rent." "Stop, stop, stop. Don't flaunt your mathematical prowess." Klee lowered his palm in an amused manner. Melissa first stopped before adding, "It's pretty good walking to school. Our teacher said that everyone should exercise frequently. Besides, I can pick some damaged components on the way." Klee chuckled and said, "Then let's do the math again. The public carriage costs 12 soldi. The rent is 12 soldi and 3 pence. It's a total of £1 for soldi and 3 pence. Using Benson's salary is enough to pay for it, and there will be quite a bit of change left. Yes, he has received last week's salary. As for me, I can still earn £1 10 soldi every week. Even if we eat meat every day while counting expenses like gas, charcoal, wood, and condiments, we would still have some left if we are frugal with lunch. We can even subscribe to the morning papers for just 1 penny. In 2 months, when I make up for the advanced payment, I can save money for both you and Benson. We can have new clothes. But we have to think of the possible accidents. Melissa stayed firm on her point. Klee smiled at her and said, then we can eat less meat. Don't you find spending 100 minutes on the road a waste of time? You could use that time to read more and think over problems and improve your results. That way, Melissa, you will be graduate with excellent grades. You will be able to find a job with a pretty good salary. When that happens, what is there to worry about? He fully displayed his experience gained from debating with people on message boards and finally convinced Melissa. She agreed to take the public carriage to school. Phew, I've finally suckered her into doing it. No, how can I call it suckering? This is called convincing. Klee lampooned before taking over the groceries that Melissa had bought. He said with a sigh, remember to buy beef or meat like mutton and chicken. Eat until you're full and enjoy yourself. Only then will you be equipped with a healthy body and a clever brain to match the demanding requirements needed for your studies. Just mentioning it makes me salivate. Melissa puckered her lips and after a few seconds of silence said, all right. The next morning, after ensuring that Melissa took a public carriage, Klee and Benson separated and went to their respective companies. The moment Klee stepped into the door, he saw old Neil and Rosen chatting by the reception desk. The former was still in his classic black robe, without any concern for the gazes of others. The latter had changed into a casual cream-colored dress. Good morning, Mr. Neil, Miss Rosen, greeted Klee as he took off his hat. Old Neil gave him a mischievous look. Good morning. You did not hear anything you shouldn't have heard last night, right? No, I slept very well. Klee was also quite puzzled over that. He could only put it down to his inadequate perception. Haha, don't mind that. Actually, it's not that easily heard. Old Neil pointed to the partition and said, go to the armory. We will continue out mysticism lessons this morning. Klee nodded and followed old Neil down the stairs and arrived at the armory to replace Brett, who had been on duty the entire night. What will we be learning today? Asked Klee curiously. Old Neil dragged out his response and said, the complicated and basic knowledge. But before that, let me teach you an interesting trick. He pointed at the silver chain on his wrist. There was a pure moonstone hanging from the chain. Chapter 40. Mysticism Curriculum, an interesting trick? Klee asked out of extreme curiosity. Old Neil chuckled and said, I'll complete my patrol of the armory, storeroom, and archives. Use the 2 cups on the table to make 2 cups of coffee. In one of the cups, put something unpleasant. As for what it is, you can decide for yourself. Use your imagination. The only request from me is to not waste too much coffee powder. Those are coffee beans grown on the Fainapotter Plateau and hand-ground by me. All right. Although Klee was unsure what old Neil was up to, he happily agreed to it. He watched him open the iron gates to the armory with a copper key and then heard the echoing footsteps inside. Slowly, he settled the cups down and confirmed that there was still hot water in the kettle. He removed the silver tin can's lid and using a tiny spoon with a metallic sheen, Klee scooped a spoonful of rich aromatic coffee powder into each of the 2 cups. Then, he poured in the hot water and stirred it. As a transmigrator who came from an era abundant in resources, he was no stranger to coffee. However, it was only limited to instant coffee. After finishing the task, Klee pondered for a moment and sat down. He crossed his right leg and took some of the mud which had stained the bottom of his leather boots and placed it in the left cup. Then, he carefully stirred it again until the colors and smells of the 2 cups of coffee were practically indistinguishable. A few minutes later, old Neil walked out the armory while swinging his keys. He then closed the iron gates with a clang. Are you done? He turned his slightly turbid dark red eyes over, and looked at Klee across the table. Yes, replied Klee with a nod. Old Neil chuckled and removed the silver chain around his wrist and sat down. His expression quickly turned serene. He held out his chain-holding left hand and allowed it to hang over the coffee cup to his right. The moonstone nearly touched the liquid. Amid the relaxing calmness, the moonstone trembled suddenly. It began spinning the chain in a counterclockwise manner.
"This cup is the one with the unpleasant thing," said old Neil surely.
Without waiting for Klee to confirm, he put away the silver chain and picked up the other cup of coffee and took a sip. "Do you like bitter coffee? I'm used to having a tablespoon of sugar and a tablespoon of milk." Klee did not reply but instead asked with his interest piqued, "Your divination sure is accurate. Was it because of the moonstone?" "That was moonstone, right? This is known as pendulum dowsing in divination. It's also called spirit dowsing. It relies on your own astral projections connection with the spirit world and space to communicate with spiritual intelligence through the aid of natural materials such as crystals, gems, or special metals. The good and bad of things can be divined. Let's talk about the 2 cups of coffee. A counterclockwise motion implies bad, while a clockwise motion is good. If it doesn't move, it's neither good or bad. You can write the statement on a piece of paper. Take note, it's a statement and not a question." Old Neil put down the cup of coffee and explained in detail. Klee asked as though he was thinking, "Does that mean one should use questioning sentences?"
"Yes, you cannot use 'is so-and-so willing to be my fiancé?' But you should instead use 'so-and-so is willing to be my fiancé.'
Write it on a piece of paper and place it on the desk. Then use your dominant hand to hold the pendulum chain. Take note, use your dominant hand, said old Neil with a chuckle. When doing so, keep your arms straight. Adjust the chain's length and make the moonstone hang just above the piece of paper to the point of almost touching what we wrote. Then, close your eyes and repeat the sentence 7 times in your mind. Open your eyes when you are done and see if the spirit pendulum turns or not. If it doesn't, close your eyes again and repeat the process until it moves. Klee nodded slightly and asked, "Counterclockwise means no, and clockwise means yes?" "It can also be interpreted as success or failure," corrected old Neil. He taught Klee the other usages and details of spirit pendulum divination. Klee pondered over the matter and discovered that it was a very useful divination trick. For instance, he could quickly use it in an unfamiliar environment to determine if the food he was offered was poisonous or not. He did not need any additional knowledge of field biology. Of course, such divination methods were overly simple. The answers he could receive were limited to 2 or 3. There was no way for deeper investigation or interpretation. For example, although something could be harmful to the body, it could become very beneficial after some processing. An example was certain foods. They were indeed damaging to the body, but nothing serious. If one was on the brink of starving, eating it would not be a huge problem. These were things that spirit dowsing could not determine. "I will have to quickly save money to buy crystals or pure silver to create a spirit pendulum," Klee sighed. Old Neil looked at him in puzzlement. "You can apply for one directly. This is standard issue for Beyonders, especially Beyonders like us who take on a support role. There's still a topaz and pure silver spirit pendulum in the armory. But I'm still not a formal member of the team." Klein's heart palpitated in excitement, but he felt a little hesitant. Old Neil chuckled and said, "For Beyonders, regardless of whether they are formal members or not, they have to be provided with conveniences in other areas since there's no pay rise. Maybe the word perk is more suitable. I'll apply with Captain later." Klee clenched his fists secretly as he made up his mind. How was he to know if Captain would approve his request without trying? "All right," said old Neil with a smile. "We can officially begin our mysticism curriculum. The basics consist of symbolism. Do you know what symbolism means?"
Klee recalled the bits and pieces he had heard and the things he had seen and heard from his spirit world and the gray fog.
He deliberated and said, "Regardless of the spirit world or the illusory stellar space, as well as the unknown realms, they are beyond our sensory world. It's not something that can be accurately described by the information our ears, nose, and eyes obtain. What we obtain are simply indescribable experiences and direct revelations. They also appear as abstract characters or pictorial symbols. These symbols represent different items and different meanings." "Very accurate.
As expected of a seer."
Old Neil nodded solemnly. "Only by grasping the ability to interpret the symbols can you really take the next step into the world of mysticism. Yes, the pictures on tarot cards and each of the elements in the pictures are symbols. They are man-made symbols that help us understand and interpret primordial revelations." He pulled out a piece of paper and picked up a fountain pen beside him. He drew a short curve. Following that, he added a few vertical lines beneath the curve. He looked up at Klee and asked, "Do you know what this symbol represents?" Klee looked at it for quite a while before saying hesitatingly, "Eyelashes?" Old Neil exhaled. "This is the symbol of the bumper harvest constellation. This is the thunderous constellation, and this is the frost constellation." He casually drew a few more symbols. As Klee memorized them, he could not help but comment, "The names of these constellations are really, especially unsophisticated." Yes, unsophisticated. How tacky and primordial. Old Neil revealed a smile. Emperor Roselle thought the same back then. He always had the intention of changing the constellation names to things like Virgo, Cancer, and Scorpio. Unfortunately, he did not have the strength to go against tradition. At the very least, these constellations' old names and the corresponding dates they represent guide farming and harvests. I have to say that Emperor Roselle sure is a person with ideas. Klee was at a loss for words. Yes, Emperor Roselle was likely a decent person when he was alive. Old Neil was unable to understand Klee's humor as he continued explaining the various basic symbols, such as the various constellations, the sun, the crimson moon, the brown star, the red star, and the blue star. While talking about these, he would teach Klee how to draw the divination astrolabe and indicate what things to pay attention to. He also taught the materials and creation of a crystal ball, and the choice of incantations. The teachings overwhelmed Klee. If not for his discovery that the seer potion had improved his memory slightly, he would have long asked old Neil to stop to aid his digesting of the information. That's all for today's mysticism class. Think over it yourself and ask me if you have any questions. Old Neil took out a gold pocket watch and opened it with a snap to check the time. Do not forget to read the historical documents I prepared for you. To be frank, I feel fear seeing them. All right. Klee took the pieces of paper that were sketched with symbols by Old Neil. He quickly went through the mysticism knowledge he learned today to prevent himself from forgetting it. Old Neil took a sip of a newly brewed cup of coffee and said, "Memory itself won't do. You have to use it often. That way you can make the knowledge instinctual. Also, cogitation has to be carried on every day. Only more practice and usage will allow you to grasp the power of the potion, digging into the mysteries it hides away and removing its unpleasant effects." With this raised, Klee recalled acting and the divination club. He probed, "My potion's abilities are related to divination. Practicing by myself will not do. I need to make contact with lots of people and divine for them to quickly grasp it. I plan on joining the divination club after having some spare cash, the one on House Street in Northborough, to become a real seer." This was not something he could hide from the Nighthawks in the future. It was better to prepare them. "Your idea is very similar to Daly's. She has always clamored to be a real spirit medium." Old Neil shook his head and laughed. "But why must you wait till you have spare cash? You can apply to Dunn and get him to approve of the expenses. Organizations like a divination club might also have cultists or members of evil organizations in them. As a civilian staff member of the Nighthawks and a standard Beyonder, your membership makes it easy for us to monitor them. It's part of the job. We would regularly monitor these places, but as we lack manpower, we can't keep watch on them for long. Now, it can be handled to you." "I can do that?" As he looked at Old Neil's serious expression, Klee was dumbfounded. "This is making an expense claim for private matters. I know nothing about such matters. Indeed, I'm just a keyboard warrior. You wish to use your own money to do this?" Old Neil smiled as he added when he saw Klein's face. Klee immediately shook his head as he answered firmly, "I plan on reporting it to Captain." Old Neil nodded in satisfaction and looked at the cup of coffee with the unpleasant thing inside. It had not been poured away. "What did you put in there?" Klee smiled embarrassingly. "It's just some dirt underneath my boots. Its color and your coffee powder looks almost the same." Old Neil was taken aback as he suddenly clasped his mouth and roared, "Why aren't you pouring it away yet?" Chapter 41. Audrey and her Susie. After pouring away the coffee and returning to the armory to take the thick stack of historical materials and explanatory transcripts from Old Neil, Klee followed the wall of lights up the staircase to the Blackthorn Security Company. Tap, tap, tap. His footsteps echoed in the sealed and quiet basement. After Klee left the spiral staircase, he pushed open the door and identified his bearings before heading for the second office opposite of him. After familiarizing himself for 2 days, he had a general understanding of the layout of the Blackthorn Security Company. The entrance brought visitors to a huge reception hall with sofas and tables.
Through the partition there was an inner region.
To the left of the corridor were 3 rooms. From the nearest to the furthest, they were Mrs. Oriana's account room, a rest room with a few sofa beds, and the staircase that led underground. On the right were 3 rooms. From the nearest to the furthest was Captain Dunn Smith's office, a civilian staff office with a typewriter, and the entertainment room for formal members of the Nighthawks team. Klein had previously seen Leonard Mitchell playing cards with 2 other teammates in the entertainment room. He guessed that they were playing Fighting the Landlord. Of course, Emperor Rochelle had already given it a new name, Fighting Evil. However, the way it was played was identical to what Klein knew. Brett was entitled to a day of sleep after a night shift. Roseanne was at the reception desk. The carriage driver who was in charge of procuring necessities and collecting supplies, Cesare Francis, was out as usual. When Klein opened the door to the civilian staff office, the 3 desks inside were empty. Only the typewriter sat there silently. Ackerson Company's Model 1346 typewriter. Klein, who had seen similar objects in his mentor's office and Welch's place, muttered. He felt that the complicated mechanisms inside were filled with the beauty of machinery. He walked to the desk with the typewriter. After preparing himself, he attempted to type something on air. In the beginning, he often converted the local language to Chinese pinyin instinctively. Only after he was familiar with it did he digest the original Klein's corresponding memory fragment and no longer made mistakes. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythmic tapping on the typewriter sounded like a melody composed from the heavy marriage of metal and industry. Under this melody, Klein quickly typed the expenditure application. However, he was in no hurry to meet Dunn Smith. Instead, he focused his mind and read the materials provided by Old Neil seriously. It was both revision and new material. When it was almost noon, he stretched his neck and put away the documents. He then read and consolidated what he had learned on mysticism in the morning. Only after all that did he take his application to the office next door and knocked on the door gently. Dunn was waiting for lunch to be delivered. When he saw Klein hand him the document, the corners of his mouth curved up. "Did Old Neil teach you this?" "Yes." Klein did not hesitate to betray Old Neil. Dunn picked up his dark red fountain pen and signed it. "I happen to be applying for funding for the months of July, August, and September from the church and the police department. I'll add yours in. When it's approved, get the money from Mrs. Oriana. You can draw the spirit pendulum in the afternoon." "All right," Klein answered simply and vigorously. His tone and eyes were obviously filled with joy. Before bidding Dunn farewell, he asked casually, "Shouldn't the budget for July, August, and September be applied for by June? Why are you applying for July's budget only in July?" Dunn fell silent for a few seconds before sipping his coffee. "We encountered 3 cases in June. I was so busy that I forgot about it." As expected of Captain and his poor memory, Klein knew he had asked a question he should not have asked. He gave a chuckle before leaving immediately. With that, he began a simple but regular lifestyle. He would spend half an hour in the early morning cogitating. He would have 2 hours of mysticism lessons in the morning, and an hour and a half of studying the historical documents. After lunch, he would take a short nap in the break room to regain his energy. Following that, he would draw bullets and head to the shooting club. After finishing his practice, he would stroll over to Welch's place, which was not too far. He would then change routes and return to Iron Cross Street. That way, he could save on the carriage fees. If he had time, he would practice his spirit vision and spirit dowsing. On the way, he would buy groceries. In a private chemistry laboratory equipped with apparatus and items. A tall, blonde Audrey was looking at the cup in her hand. There were countless bubbles and it made the atmosphere serene. Finally, the liquid in the cup precipitated into a sticky silver substance. "Haha, I'm indeed talented in mysticism. I succeeded in 1 try. I was worried of failure and prepared 2 sets of materials." The girl muttered to herself in delight. She put away the items she took from her family's vault or exchanged them with others. She took a deep breath and prepared to close her eyes to drink down the spectator potion. At that moment, barking sounded from outside the laboratory. Audrey frowned instantly. She hid the cup of silver liquid in a dark corner, turned around and headed to the door. "Susie, who's here?" Audrey turned the doorknob and asked the golden retriever sitting in front of the door. Susie wagged her tail in an obsequious manner. Her personal maidservant, Annie, had appeared in the corridor nearby. Audrey walked out of the laboratory and closed the door.
She looked at Annie and said, "Didn't I tell you?
Do not disturb me when I'm running chemistry experiments."
Vexed Annie answered, "But there's an invitation from the Duchess, Duchess Della."
Duke Negan's wife? Audrey took a few steps forward and asked Annie.
"Yes.
She has managed to hire the services of the palace's baker, Madame Vivi, and plans to invite you and Madame to afternoon tea." Annie recounted the invitation. Audrey tapped her cheeks discreetly and said, "Tell my mother that I have a headache. Perhaps I'm a little dehydrated because of the scorching sun. Please get her to convey my apologies to Madame Della." As she spoke, she acted frail. "Miss, it's not only afternoon tea, but a literature salon," added Annie. "But that won't treat my dizziness." "I need rest," rejected Audrey firmly. Simultaneously, she muttered deep down,
"If they insist, I'll faint for all of you to see."
"The etiquette teacher said that I can do it most perfectly. I think I heard something."
"All right,"
Annie exhaled and said, "Do you need me to help you back to your room?"
"There's no need.
I'll clean up the laboratory first." Audrey was yearning to return immediately to consume the potion. However, she suppressed her impatience. She only returned to the laboratory's entrance when she saw Annie leave. Suddenly, she discovered that the golden retriever, Susie, who was waiting outside, was gone. Furthermore, the door to the laboratory was half opened. "I forgot that Susie can open doors with handles." What was that sound?
Not good.
Audrey heard crisp sounds coming from within. Suddenly, she came to a realization as she charged into the laboratory. All she could see was the cups shattered on the floor. Susie was licking the final drop of silver liquid. Audrey stood rooted at the entrance like a statue. Susie immediately sat down and looked at her owner innocently as she wagged her tail. In the seas beyond the Pritz harbor, there was an island perennially enveloped in storms. An ancient sailboat was docked at its harbor. A blond man dressed in a robe with lightning patterns was looking at Alger Wilson opposite to him. He asked, perplexed, "Alger, you could have returned to the kingdom and become a captain of a mandated Punisher team or a reputable bishop. Why did you choose to voyage out into sea and become the captain of the Blue Avenger?" Alger wore a stoic expression on his rough face. He replied solemnly, "The sea belongs to the storm. This is the Lord's kingdom.
I'm willing to abide by the Lord's will and monitor this area of his kingdom."
"All right." The blonde-haired man clenched his fist and struck his chest.
"May the storm be with you. May the storm be with you."
Alger replied with the same standard salute.
He stood on the deck with a few sailors and watched his companions leave the boat, walking into the distance.
"Signs, you do not understand because you do not know enough," Alger muttered silently. Meanwhile, Audrey finished her second concoction in a panic-stricken state. Seeing that the silver potion looked nothing different from before, she was nearly moved to tears. Gulp. She quickly drank down the spectator potion. Friday. A storm befell Tingen. The heavy rain pounded on the windows of every household. Inside the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein, Roseanne, and Brett sat on the sofa in the reception hall and enjoyed lunch. As there was only a kettle for boiling water, there was no way to heat up leftovers. Klein could not eat rye bread every day or take the carriage home every day. If he did that, he would have to walk from Iron Cross Street to Welch's place in the afternoon and consider taking a carriage back. It was a waste of money. Therefore, he began joining Roseanne and his colleagues in eating the so-called office rations. The nearby Old Will's restaurant would punctually send a waiter at 10:30 every day. He would ask for their orders and after determining the quantity, he would send it over at 12:30. The food was contained in what resembled meal boxes. At 3, he would return to take their orders for dinner and take back the utensils. The rations included meat, vegetables, and bread. Although the quantity was lacking, it was barely sufficient to fill a person. A cost of a meal ranged from 7 to 10 pence depending on the different premium levels. Klein would always thicken his skin and order the meal costing 7 pence. Typically, there was half a pound of wheat bread, a tiny piece of meat cooked in different ways, a ladle of thick soup with vegetables, and tiny bits of butter or margarine. "We actually only have one nighthawk here today," Rosen said as she delivered a spoonful of thick soup into her mouth. "I heard that a case with cultist elements is going on in Golden Industry. Therefore, the police department has requested for 2 nighthawks," Brett said as he put down his bread. Klein used the remaining wheat bread and dabbed it into the last bits of meat juice before stuffing it into his mouth. He did not say a word. Under his left sleeve, there was a silver chain with a topaz hanging. At that moment, knocks sounded outside the half-closed main door. "Please come in." Rosen was taken aback as she put down her spoon. She quickly used a handkerchief to wipe her mouth and stood up.
The door was pushed open as a man in a half-top hat came in. The left shoulder of his black formal suit was drenched. The sides of his hair had grayed. He put away his umbrella and said to Klein and company, "Is this the former small mercenary squad?"
"You can say that," answered Rosen like clockwork. The lanky man coughed and said, "I have a mission request." Chapter 42. Butler Klee A Mission Request. You probably came to the wrong place. This security company's signboard is really nothing but a signboard.
Klein immediately held back his urge to lampoon when he heard the visitor.
How he yearned for there to be a message board and a screen for him to share his thoughts. But he soon realized that he had once asked a similar question. The captain's answer was that they could take on jobs if they were free. The money earned could be used as funding for the team's petty cash account and bonuses for the participants. Rosen's eyes darted around as she thought for a moment before saying, "Our security personnel are all out on missions. The fastest it will take for them to return is an hour. If your matter isn't urgent, you can consider our services." Among the 6 formal Nighthawk members, Captain Dunn Smith had been invited to the cathedral by the bishop for some unknown discussion. Leonard Mitchell was guarding Cheney's gate in his place. Corpse collector Fry and sleepless Royale Radine had already headed to the Golden Indus Borough to assist the police in the investigation of a robbery case with cultist inklings. Sleepless Kenley White was on leave, while midnight poet Seekatron had gone to Raphael Cemetery in the north suburb for a daily patrol. As for the remaining 2 Beyonders, old Neil was frail and too advanced in his years. He had not taken any missions in a long time. Klein was still a novice and was truly inadequate in various aspects. "They are all out." With one hand holding his umbrella, the lanky man's expression turned gloomy as he took off his hat.
He bowed and said, "Sorry for intruding."
"Goodbye." He turned around and walked out. He went down the stairs and left 36 Zutland Street amid the spattering rain and howling winds. What a bloody pity. Rosen watched the man left and sighed regretfully. Although she would not have gotten any share of the commission, she definitely would have been able to partake in a sumptuous meal. There's nothing we can do about it. Cheney's gate needs someone watching it all the time. Klein put down his cutlery in satisfaction. Even though he did not like the soup mixture of turnips and vegetables, he still drank it clean. "Don't tell me you want Brett to take the mission? Or yourself?" Rosen rolled her eyes and giggled. "Brett won't do, but you can."
"Our Mr. Seer." The moment she finished her sentence, she immediately realized what she had just said. She covered her mouth in shock because the door had not been fully closed. If someone walked past outside or heard anything about Beyonders, it would be considered a leak. Thankfully Captain isn't around. Rosen looked out the door and secretly stuck her tongue out. "Or I'll have to go for confession again." Brett and Klein laughed out in unison as they exchanged looks before beginning to put away the cutlery. After everything was done, Klein, who did not bring his umbrella, decided to stay at Blackthorn Security Company due to the ongoing rain. He took out some newspapers and sat on the soft but bouncy sofa as he leisurely began his afternoon break. The airship route from Backlund to Desi Bay is now in service. The complete anthology of the great Detective Mansing is publishing soon. An advertisement for Legolas weapons? A standard model revolver carrying 6 bullets costs £3 and 10 soldi. A double-barrel gun costs £2. Klein flipped through the Tingen City Honest paper when a particular piece of news suddenly caught his attention. The suspect responsible for killing Mr. Welch and Miss Naya has been caught. We believe it is a much-needed reprieve from the horror that has gripped Northborough, Golden Indus Borough, and East Borough. Welch's father, Mr. McGovern, who is a banker, has escorted his youngest son's corpse back to Constant City where a grand burial will be held. After reading it a few times, Klein suddenly sighed. From the looks of it, Welch's father had bought the police's explanations and did not hire a private investigator to investigate the matter. His grief from losing his youngest son can't be any greater than that of my parents who lost their only son. In a sullen mood, Klein sat there motionless for a long time. He neither found it odd that he was not invited to Welch's and Naya's burials, nor did he feel depressed.
Once everything calms down, I'll find a chance to offer a bouquet of flowers to their graves. Klein was about to take a nap in the break room when a knock came from the door of the reception hall again. "Please come in." Roseanne, who was nodding off, suddenly jolted awake.
The half-closed door was pushed open again. The lanky man from before walked in once again. "Can I wait here? You're mercenaries, no, security personnel should be back soon, right?" he asked sincerely, trying his best to hide his anxious expression. "Sure. Please have a seat." Rosen pointed at the sofa nearby. Klein asked out of curiosity, "Where did you hear about our security company? Who introduced you here?" He had made 2 trips despite the heavy afternoon storm while still willing to wait? Yes. The Nighthawks must have easily resolved missions that might seem very difficult to others. They must have accrued quite a reputation. The man left his umbrella outside the door, and as he walked to the sofa, he replied with a rueful smile, "I have traveled the nearby streets and paid a visit to all the mercenaries, security companies and private investigators. You are my only hope. The others do not have the manpower to take additional missions. To be frank, if not for the waiter that delivers meals, I really did not imagine that there was another security company here. It's completely different from what I imagined." Klein was stunned. Rosen interjected with a question. "They are very busy." "Are there that many missions?" The man sat down and sighed. "You are a mercenary team, no, a security company. I believe you must have heard of the armed burglary murder at House Street?" "House Street? Armed burglary murder? All right, unfortunately, I'm one of the people involved." Klein nodded with a slightly heavy heart. "Yes. Due to the presence of a ferocious and cruel criminal, the rich men living in the neighboring streets, and even across all of Tingen City, are terrified. Apart from increasing the numbers of their security detail, they have also hired many more security personnel and private detectives. This resulted in a shortage of supply in your line of work," the tall and skinny man explained clearly. A standard chain reaction. Klein and Rosen exchanged looks and saw the self-deprecating smile from each other's faces. The security industry had entered a golden age. Yet, Blackthorn Security Company was not affected in any way. It was apparent how dismally the company was run. Of course, to a certain extent, it also proved the success of the Nighthawks in hiding themselves. After waiting for another 20+ minutes, Klein prepared to leave since the rain was coming to a stop. He planned on practicing at the shooting club. At that moment, the black-haired and green-eyed Leonard Mitchell walked out of the partition. He looked curiously at the sofa. "This is a client. Is Captain back?" Rosen asked delightfully. "Back." The lanky man was taken aback when he heard that. He had been sitting there, staring at the door. How did he not discover someone's return? Roseanne's expression immediately froze as she chuckled. "As a security company, we don't only use the front door." "Figures." The lanky man nodded in enlightenment. He was also not surprised by the term captain. Security companies were mercenary teams or small-scale mercenary guilds. It was normal for captain to be used. Leonard did not tuck in his white shirt. His black vest was also casually draped on. He took a glance at the lanky man when he suddenly snapped his fingers and said, "I'm a member of the security personnel at Blackthorn. How might I address you? How may I help you?" Perhaps it was because he had long heard about the unrestrained characters of mercenaries that he did not feel the anger of being humiliated. Instead, he let out a breath of relief. He watched Leonard sit down, and organized his words. "My name is Klee, a butler of Mr. Vickroy, a tobacco merchant. His only son, little Elliot, was kidnapped this morning. We have already informed the police and the matter has been given high priority. However, Mr. Vickroy remains uneasy. He wishes to go through the channels which mercenaries, security personnel have, as well as your understanding of Tingen, to investigate the case from a different angle and ensure that little Elliot is rescued safely. If you are able to find where the kidnappers are hiding, Mr. Vickroy will be willing to pay you £100. If you have the means to successfully save young Master Elliot, he is willing to pay double, £200. Leonard Mitchell smiled leisurely. "Mr. Vickroy seems to only wish for us to find the kidnappers' hideout? If not, he will not think that his only son is worth £100. A tobacco merchant who has close ties with the southern plantations will not just offer £200. No, Mr. Vickroy is only an ordinary merchant. He's not considered wealthy. Besides, he believes the police will be more professional when it comes to rescuing his son," Klee answered frankly. "All right. No problem." Leonard snapped his fingers again. His green eyes turned their gaze on Rosen. "My beautiful lady, please write up a contract.
Don't always act like a poet. In fact, all you do is recite the works of others. Having forgotten the presence of the client, Rosen quipped. She was used to exchanging snipes with Leonard. Of course, the Blackthorn Security Company did not really care about its clients. It was great to have them, but it was also fine not having them. Rosen left the reception counter and entered the staff office. Soon, there were sounds of typing coming out from the office. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a little. He found them too unprofessional. There was no standard template for a contract. This sure is tragic. And more saddening is the fact that I'm working at such an unprofessional company. The moment these thoughts arose in him, Rosen completed a simple contract that had only a few clauses. Then, Klee and Leonard Mitchell signed it. After Klee stamped it, she took the contract and returned to the accounting room and got Mrs. Oriana to stamp it with the Blackthorn Security Company logo. Something that was actually useless. Dunn typically handed it to Oriana for safekeeping. On Sunday, it would be passed to Roseanne and Company. I'll wait for your good news. After receiving one copy of the contract, Klee stood up and bowed with his hat off. Leonard did not respond. He seemed to be in deep thought. He suddenly turned his head toward Klein and revealed a smile. I need your help. Ah. Klein was taken aback. I mean, you and I can finish this mission together. The corners of Leonard's mouth curved up slightly as he explained. I'm good at combat, shooting, climbing, sensing, and chanting, and taking on some support roles. But that does not include looking for people. You don't expect old Neil to go out in such weather, right? When he said sensing, his voice was lowered to a mumble that Klein could barely hear. All right. Klein did have the urge to attempt his new abilities, while also feeling a little wary toward Leonard Mitchell. Phew. Let's hope it will be completed successfully. I wonder how useful my seer abilities will be. He wondered with some anticipation. Chapter 43. Search. While looking at Klein, Leonard smiled and nodded. Then, do you need anything from them? He had cooperated with old Neil and Company numerous times, so he naturally knew that divination required a medium, especially when the person being divined was not present. Klein thought for a moment before saying to Klee, I need some of Elliot's recent clothes which have not been washed or starched. It would be better if you have any accessories he used to wear on him. He tried to choose ordinary mediums, not something that would normally invite questions. But even so, Klee wore a look of puzzlement. Why? After his question he added, I have a picture of young Master Elliot on me. Why? Because we are divining his location. Klein was momentarily at a loss for an answer. If he answered truthfully, ignoring the fact that it violated the confidentiality clause, Klee would likely storm out immediately and rip apart the contract while cursing, this bunch of cheats. If that works, why don't I find the most famous spirit medium in Awa County? By the side, Leonard Mitchell chuckled and said, Mr. Klee, my partner, colleague rears a unique pet. Its sense of smell is sharper than a hound's. That's why we need clothes that little Elliot wore and items he used to wear on him to aid us in finding him. As you know, clues typically bring you to a general region. As for the picture, we would need it too. Both of us need to know what little Elliot looks like. Klee accepted the reason by nodding slowly. Will you be waiting here? Or will you be going with me to Mr. Vickroy's residence in the city? Let's go together. It saves time, replied Klein simply. Not only was he eager to try out his abilities as a beyonder, but he also wanted to save the child. All right, the carriage is downstairs. As Klee spoke, he took out a black and white photograph and handed it to Leonard. It was a picture of Elliot Vickroy alone. He was about 10 years old with rather long hair that nearly covered his eyes. There were obvious freckles on his face and he did not seem to stand out. Leonard glanced at it and handed it to Klein. Klein took a careful look and placed the photograph into his pocket. Then, he took his cane and put on his hat. He followed the two out of Blackthorn Security Company and boarded the carriage downstairs. The carriage's interior was rather spacious. It was lined with thick carpet and a tiny table to rest items on. As Klee was around, Klein and Leonard did not say a word. They quietly took in the experience of traversing the pooling roads in a carriage. The carriage driver is quite good. Leonard broke the silence after some time with praise and a smile. Yeah, Klein answered perfunctorily. Klee forced a smile and said, Your compliments are his honor. We will be there soon. As they were afraid of alerting the kidnappers, the carriage did not stop at the Vickroy's residence. Instead, it stopped at the side of a nearby street. Klee held an umbrella and returned along. After waiting for some time, Leonard talked to Klein again. My surmise the last time was not without a goal. I was just trying to tell you that the notebook will definitely appear again. Perhaps it might be soon. That really isn't a happy surmise. Klein used his chin to gesture towards the carriage driver outside, indicating that he did not wish to discuss sensitive topics with outsiders around. Leonard whistled and turned his head to look out the window. He saw raindrops streak across the glass, leaving behind blurry marks. It made the world outside a complete blur. After a while, Klee returned with a bag of items. Since he walked in a hurry, the edge of his trousers were soiled and his shirt front was slightly wet. These are the clothes young Master Elliot wore yesterday. This is the storm amulet he used to wear. Klein took it and glanced at it. He discovered it to be a miniature gentleman's formal suit, a small shirt, vest, bow tie, etc. And the storm amulet was made of bronze. It was carved with symbols representing gales and sea waves, but they did not trigger Klein's perception. I'll recount in detail the incidents leading up to young Master Elliot's kidnapping. Hopefully, it will let you find him easier. Klee sat down and described the nightmare that happened in the morning, hoping that the helpers he went through great trouble to hire would be of help. Klein and Leonard held no interest in the specifics. All they cared about was the number of kidnappers, if anything unusual had happened, or if they had any weapons. 3. Normal, armed with firearms. After obtaining the desired information, they bade Klee farewell and hired a two-wheeled light carriage. Unlike public carriages, private hire carriages were either four-wheeled or two-wheeled. They were charged either by time or distance. The latter was at 4 pence a kilometre in the city and 8 pence a kilometre outside. The former cost 2 soldi per hour or part thereof. After the first hour, there were additional charges of 6 pence every 15 minutes. In inclement weather or if the customer needed to go faster, the fare could even be higher. Klein had heard from Isaac that in the capital Backland, these carriage drivers were famous for quoting outrageous prices. To him, taking a private carriage was quite a luxury. However, he did not need to worry about this at the moment since Leonard had tossed 2 1-soldi notes to the carriage driver. Charge it by the time. After Leonard gave his instructions, he closed the carriage's door. Where are you going? The carriage driver was delighted and puzzled as he held the 2 notes. Wait a moment. Leonard cast his gaze at Klein. Klein nodded slightly and took out Elliot's clothes. He spread it out on the carriage's floor and then wound the storm amulet around his cane's handle. He held the silver-inlaid black cane and hung it straight over Elliot's clothes. He gathered the sphere of light in his head as his mind rapidly turned still. His brown eyes quickly turned deeper in color as he entered a half-cogitation state. He felt his body's spirit turning light. He vaguely saw the world of spirits everywhere. He silently said, Elliot's location. After repeating it 7 times, he released his grip of the black cane, but the cane did not fall to the ground. It remained standing in front of him even though the carriage was shaking. Minute but invisible stirrings happened around Klein, and he felt as if pairs of eyes were looking at him. Over the past few days, Klein had felt this sensation occasionally when he was in the state of cogitation or spirit vision. With a little fear, he looked at the cane with his deep black eyes. He recited once again in his heart, Elliot's location. Elliot's location. After he finished saying that, the cane fell and pointed straight ahead. Straight. Klein held the cane and said in a deep voice. His voice sounded a little ethereal as though it could penetrate the unknown world. This was one of the divination abilities he had grasped. It was called dowsing rod seeking. The tool of choice had to be wooden, metallic, or a mixture of both. In ordinary circumstances, he would require 2 real dowsing rods. Dowsing rods were shaped like 2 straight metal wires tapered to an edge. He would hold on to the shorter side and turn it to ascertain the correct direction. But as a seer, Klein realized that through practice, he could search for people directly using this method. He could also use his cane as a replacement for dowsing rods. The direction in which the cane fell was the direction of the item he was seeking. As for the Antigonus family's notebook, Klein could not remember it at all. Without the slightest impression, there was no way for him to find it. Go straight. Leonard instructed the carriage driver loudly. We will tell you when there's a need to turn. The carriage driver did not understand why that was necessary, but the notes in his pocket and the willingness of his passengers to hand over the money kept him quiet. He chose to follow the strange instructions. The carriage proceeded slowly, passing through one street after another. Midway, Klee used dowsing rod seeking to correct their direction. After the carriage circled a building once, he finally determined that Elliot was inside. It had only been 30 minutes since they bade Klee farewell. After sending off the cane, Klee did not continue using Elliot's clothes. Instead, he placed the cane, entwined with the storm amulet, directly onto the ground. His eyes turned dark once again as the raindrops around him suddenly spun in place. The cane fell to the front with a slant. Klee pointed at the staircase and said, "There. At times, I really envy old Neil. Similarly, I envy you now." Upon seeing this scene, Leonard smiled with a sigh. Klee shot him a glance and replied with a calm tone, "This is nothing difficult. If you are willing to learn, you would definitely be able to master it. Your perceptivity should be very high, right?" Leonard nodded and chuckled. "That's not something good." He quickened his pace and walked into the building amid the ending rain. Klee was afraid of drenching his formal suit, so he jogged in tow. The building only had 3 stories. It was similar to a unit block from Earth. The entrance to each floor was situated along the flight of stairs. There were only 2 units on per floor. Klee used dowsing rods seeking on both the first and second floors, but the cane remained still while pointing upward. The 2 of them quieted their footsteps and arrived at the 3rd floor. Klee once again placed the black cane on the floor. Whoosh! A breeze blew across the stairs as his pupils changed colors. The darkness seemed like it could suck the souls of people. Whoosh! 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 Sobs seemed to sound out around them. Klee relaxed his palm as the cane with the entwined storm amulet magically stood erect. He silently read Elliot's location again. He watched his black cane drop silently as it pointed to the right room. They should be in there. While Klee picked up his cane, he tapped his glabella twice. Various colors saturated as he looked at the right room. He saw all sorts of auras inside. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 kidnappers and 1 hostage. The numbers match. One of their auras is short. It's likely Elliot. Mr. Klee said that they have 2 hunting rifles and a revolver, Klee whispered. Leonard chuckled. Let me recite a poem for them. Why be a kidnapper? Why can't you happily be civilized person? He put down the bag with Elliot's clothes and took 2 steps forward. His expression suddenly turned serene and melancholic. His magnetic and deep voice gradually sounded. Oh, the thread of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies. Chapter 44. Fate. Leonard's singing sounded like a lullaby as it lightly resounded through the doors and into the winding wooden stairwell. Klein's mind immediately turned torpid. He felt like he saw a silent moonlight and serene rippling lake. His eyelids rapidly turned heavy as if he were about to fall asleep standing. Amid these indistinct sensations, he also felt a strange, formless, and indifferent focus on his back. It felt like he was wandering the spirit world himself. A baffling sense of déjà vu suffused as Klee suddenly found his train of thought once again. With his strong spiritual perception and extreme familiarity with cogitation, he barely escaped the influence of the midnight poem. However, he remained serene and could hardly evoke any emotions. Soon, Leonard stopped singing as he turned his head with a smile. I'm considering asking Captain's permission to apply for a Faina lute. How can there not be an accompaniment when singing? Haha, I'm just kidding. I can hear them asleep. The black-haired, green-eyed nighthawk with his poetic vibe took a stride forward and walked to the door that separated them from the kidnappers and hostage. He suddenly moved his shoulder and threw a punch at the door's lock. Crack! The wooden board around the lock shattered in a muffled manner. This requires precise control. Leonard turned his head and smiled. He then reached his hand into the hole and opened the door. Klee, who had regained consciousness, was not as confident as him. He reached under his armpit, drew his revolver, and turned the cylinder, making sure that he could shoot at a moment's notice. As the door swung back, he saw a man sleeping on a table with a gun by his feet. Another man was rubbing his eyes in a daze while trying to stand up. Bam! Leonard slid forward and struck the awakening kidnapper unconscious. Klee planned to enter as well when he suddenly sensed something. He turned around abruptly and faced the stairwell. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps were approaching from below.
It became clear that something was a hatless man in a brown coat circling the stairwell in his progression toward the third floor while hugging a paper bag of bread.
Suddenly, he stopped.
He saw a gun's barrel aiming at him with a metallic luster. His pupils reflected a young man dressed in a half-top hat, black formal suit with a bow tie of the same color. It also reflected the cane which rested along the rail and the dangerous revolver.
Do not move. Raise your hands.
3, 2, 1. Klein's tone was deep but relaxed. He held the revolver with both hands as he tried to imagine the man as a target from his practice. Amid the tense atmosphere, the man in the brown coat threw the bag of bread and slowly raised his hands.
Sir, is this a kind of a joke?
Has there been a misunderstanding? He stared intently at the finger that Klein had placed on the trigger as he forced a smile. Klein was temporarily unable to determine if he was an accomplice or a neighbor, but he did not reveal any abnormalities. He said in a deep voice, "Do not attempt to resist. Someone will determine if it's a misunderstanding in a while." At that moment, Leonard, who had finished handling the kidnappers, walked out and noticed the man in the stairwell. He said leisurely, "So the kidnappers have another accomplice responsible for buying and delivering food?" Upon hearing this, the man's pupils constricted as he suddenly raised his foot and kicked the bag of bread up in an attempt to block Klein's vision. Seemingly unaffected, Klein coldly pulled the trigger like his usual training. Bang! Blood burst out from the man's left shoulder. He tumbled to the ground and attempted to escape from the second floor. However, Leonard had already reached his hand towards the handrail before leveraging himself to jump over. With a dull thud, Leonard landed on the man from above. The man fainted as Leonard swatted away some of the blood that had splattered on him.
He looked up at Klein and chuckled.
"Nice shooting.
I was trying to hit his legs."
The corner of Klein's mouth twitched in an indiscernible manner as he caught a whiff of the smell of blood. He discovered that despite not having any enhancements to his visual, auditory, or tactile senses after consuming the seer potion, he could still see obstructed objects and hear faint footsteps, allowing him to take preemptive judgment. Was this in the scope of spiritual perception? Klein nodded in thought as he watched Leonard find a sharp dagger in the accomplice's possession and drag him into the room. With a gun and cane in each hand, Klein entered the kidnapper's room. They saw Elliot Vickroy jolt awake from the gunshot as he straightened his body and sat up slowly from a huddled position. Leonard had securely tied up the 3 kidnappers with the rope they used against Elliot. Bunched together, they were thrown in a corner. The lack of rope was made up by tearing their clothes. The unconscious man who had been shot in the shoulder was bandaged, but Leonard disdained getting his hands dirty, so he did not help him extract the bullet. Who are you people?" Elliot stammered in pleasant delight when he saw the scene before him.
"Yes, you guessed right. Very precise."
The genuflecting Leonard answered casually. "I never expected this bastard to have some humor cells in him." Klein lowered his revolver and said to Elliot, "We are mercenaries hired by your father.
You can also call us security personnel."
"Phew, for real? Have I been saved?" Elliot said joyfully without daring to make any movements. It was apparent that he had suffered quite harshly in the short few hours of being a kidnapping victim. He did not have the kind of rashness someone his age normally would have. Leonard stood up and said to Klein, "Go downstairs and find some patrolling cops. Get them to inform the tobacco merchant. I do not wish to walk out with a child and 4 idiots like a kidnapper." Klein, who was wondering about the aftermath, nodded. He put away his revolver, picked up his cane, and walked to the staircase. As he went down the stairs, he had a nagging feeling that he had forgotten something. In addition, he heard Leonard say to Elliot, "Don't be nervous. You will soon see your father, mother, and your old butler, Klee. Why don't we play a round of quint?" Klein held back his laughter and walked out into the streets. With the help of pedestrians, he found 2 patrolling policemen. He did not use his badge and identification as a member of the Special Operations Department. Instead, he used his identity as a professional security company and recounted the happenings factually. As for him holding a gun, he was not worried at all. He had received an all-purpose weapon usage certificate the day before yesterday. His application was accelerated by going through internal channels. The 2 policemen exchanged looks and one of them left to gather reinforcements and inform the Vickroy family. The other policeman followed Klein to the kidnapper's room. After waiting for more than 40 minutes, Leonard signaled to Klein while the policeman was not paying attention. Klein was to sneak out of the room with him. "Trust me, heading to the police station is an extreme waste of time. Let's leave first," The Nighthawk with the poetic bearing explained with a relaxed look. Since Leonard was making it clear that he would take any responsibility for any repercussions, he did not retort and followed in tow. Almost 5 minutes later, a few carriages rushed to the building where the kidnappers were. The old butler, Klee, disembarked with his portly master, Xueqi. Up to this moment in time, he was still in a daze. He found it incredulous that news would come so fast. It felt like a dream. Suddenly, he heard a crisp snap as he turned around. A two-wheeled carriage drove past with its windows open. The black-haired and green-eyed Leonard had snapped his fingers again. After passing by Xueqi's carriage, Leonard closed the window, turned around, and looked at Klee. He extended his right hand and smiled. "It was a pleasure working with you. I don't think we are on that good terms." Klee politely shook his head. He did not expect the kidnapping case to be resolved so quickly. All he could do was marvel at the capabilities of Beyonders. Even though he was just a half-assed Sequence 9 Beyonder, he was able to do many inconceivable things. "This is a celebratory gesture of peace among aristocrats after a clash of swords," explained Leonard with a smile. "I know." Klee had many aristocratic classmates. He looked outside the window and said with a frown, "Shouldn't we confirm with Mr. Klee? If he believes that the police rescued Elliot, our commission will be halved. A total of £100. There was no doubt about their providing of the kidnapper's location from their meeting from before. "Don't mind it. To us, money isn't that important," said Leonard with a shrug. "It's very important to me." Klee forced a polite smile and said, "Many poets died early from poverty." Leonard chuckled. "I believe Elliot would not lie on this matter. I can tell that he still has some of his innocence left in him. However, you will not get much of the £200 commission either." "How much would I get?" asked Klee immediately. As the unspoken rule has always been, half of the commission would be handed to Mrs. Oriana as additional funding for the team. The remaining would be split among members. A pity you aren't a formal member. You will only get about 10% of the remaining half. £10? That isn't bad either. Klee pretended to feel the pinch as he asked, "Aren't you worried that the kidnappers will realize that they were under the influence of a Beyonder's powers after they wake up? They will not suspect anything. They will only believe that the weather was good and very conducive for sleeping, leading to them dozing off. They will even believe that the song existed only in their dreams." "This is something we have verified before," answered Leonard very confidently. "Instead, it's your demon hunting bullets that might arouse suspicion. Of course, you being a queer who enjoys mysticism would be a perfectly reasonable explanation." "I see." Klee was relieved. He just kept feeling like he had forgotten or overlooked something. After returning to Zutland Street, Klee did not wait for Klee's arrival. He strolled to Welch's place and took a different route home. On the way, he bought some beef and olives for dinner. The meal was enjoyable as always, with the same three siblings chatting idly. However, there was an additional visitor. He was a worker responsible for collecting 1 penny for the gas meter. The evening grew dark as the siblings bade each other good night and returned to their rooms. Klee was sleeping soundly when he was suddenly awoken by something familiar outside. He opened the door in puzzlement and arrived outside the bedroom that no one stayed in. He pushed open the mottled door and saw a grey desk. There was a notebook on the table and its cover was made of hard paper. It was completely black in color. A baffling sense of déjà vu arose in him as he walked over and opened the notebook. The page he flipped open to was of a picture of someone dressed in gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress, the Fool. Beneath the Fool was a line in Hermes. "Everyone will die, including me." Horror gripped Klee's heart as he suddenly realized that the corner of the Fool's mouth was curving up. FFFFFFFF. He sat up in shock as he saw crimson moonlight penetrate his curtains. He saw his bookshelf and desk and the silhouette of his own bedroom. He realized that he had had a nightmare. As a seer, he knew what dreams typically portend. Therefore, he began to seriously search through his recollections. Klee froze up when he did because he knew what he had missed out on today. While he was immersed in Leonard's singing, he had sensed a formless and indifferent focus on his back. The feeling of being observed felt different from the usual cogitation or experience he had from using spirit vision. It gave him a sense of déjà vu. According to Captain Dunn, once a feeling of déjà vu arose in him, it probably means. Klee suddenly sat straight and confirmed the feeling. Yes, it's that notebook. That Antigonus family's notebook.
Chapter 45. Returning the Antigonus notebook is in the apartment across the kidnappers. Although it was very coincidental, Klee believed that his intuition was correct. He immediately got out of bed and rapidly changed out of the old clothes he usually wore to bed. He picked up a white shirt beside him and draped it on, quickly buttoning from top to bottom. 1, 2, 3. He suddenly realized that he was missing buttons. The left and right sides did not seem to match. On careful look, Klee realized that he had made a mistake buttoning the first button, causing the shirt to warp. He shook his head helplessly before taking a deep breath and slowly breathing out, using some of his cogitation techniques to restore his calm. After putting on his white shirt and black trousers, he barely managed to wear his armpit holster steadily. He pulled out the revolver he hid under his soft pillow and holstered it. Without time to tie a bow tie, he draped his formal suit on and with a hat and cane in each hand, he walked to the door. After putting on his half-top hat, Klee gently twisted the door handle and walked into the corridor. He carefully closed his bedroom's wooden door and sneaked downstairs like a thief. He used a fountain pen and paper in the living room to leave a note, informing his siblings that he had forgotten to mention that he had to be early for work today. The moment he was out the door, Klee felt a cool breeze and his entire being calmed down. The street in front of him was dark and silent without any pedestrians. Only the gas lamps illuminated the streets. Klee took out his pocket watch from his pocket and snapped it open. It was just 6 in the morning and the crimson moonlight had not completely faded away. However, there was a hue of sunrise over the horizon. He was just about to seek out an expensive for-hire carriage when he saw a 2-horse, 4-wheeled trackless carriage approaching him. There are public carriages this early in the morning? Klee was puzzled as he went forward and waved for it to stop. Good morning, sir. The carriage driver stopped the horses skillfully. The ticketing officer beside him had his hand to his mouth while yawning. To Zutland Street. Klee scooped out 2 pennies from his pocket and 4 halfpence. 4 pence, the ticketing officer replied without any hesitation. After paying for the ride, Klee got onto the carriage and found it empty. It exuded a clear loneliness amid the dark night. You are the first one, said the carriage driver with a smile. The 2 brown horses widened their pace as they proceeded briskly. To be honest, I never imagined there to be a public carriage so early in the morning. Klee sat near the carriage driver and made idle chatter to divert his attention and relax his tense mind. The carriage driver said in a self-deprecating manner, from 6 in the morning to 9 at night, but all I earn is £1 a week. Are there no breaks? Inquired Klee in bafflement. We take shifts to rest once a week. The carriage driver's tone turned heavy. The ticketing officer beside him added, we are in charge of plying the streets from 6 to 11 in the morning. Following that, we have lunch and an afternoon break. Near dinner time, which is 6 in the evening, we replace our colleagues. Even if we do not need rest, the 2 horses will need it. It wasn't anything like that in the past. There was an accident that should not have happened. Due to fatigue, a carriage driver lost control of his carriage and it toppled. It resulted in us having shifts. Those bloodsuckers would never become this kind so suddenly otherwise. The carriage driver scoffed. Under the illumination of dawn, the carriage drove towards Zutland Street and picked up 7 to 8 passengers on the way. After Klee was less tense, he did not converse further. He closed his eyes and recalled the experiences from yesterday, hoping to notice if he had forgotten anything. By the time the skies were bright when the sun was fully up, the carriage finally arrived at Zutland Street. Klee pressed his hat with his left hand and briskly jumped off the carriage. He quickly stepped into 36 Zutland Street and arrived outside Blackthorn Security Company after going up the flight of stairs. The door was still closed and had yet to open. Klee took out the ring of keys by his waist and found the corresponding brass key and inserted it into the keyhole and twisted it. He pushed forward as the door slowly opened. He saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell sniffing at a recently popular cigarette. To be honest, I prefer cigars. You seem to be in a rush? The poet-like Nighthawk asked in a relaxed and cozy manner. Where's Captain? Klee asked instead of answering. Leonard pointed at the partition. He's in the office. As an advanced sleepless, he only needs 2 hours of sleep in the day. I believe it's a potion those factory owners or bankers would like the most. Klee nodded and quickly passed through the partition. He saw that Dunn Smith had opened the door to his office and he was standing at its entrance. What's the matter? Dressed in his black windbreaker, he held a golden-laid cane with a solemn and stern expression. The feeling of déjà vu came to me. It should be the notebook. The Antigonus family's notebook. Klee tried hard to make his answer clear and logical.
Where was that?
Smith's expression did not have any obvious changes. However, Klee's intuition told him that a clear and invisible stir had happened in him. This was possibly a flash of his spirit or a change in his emotions. It's at the place Leonard and I saved the hostage yesterday. Opposite the kidnapper's room. I didn't notice it back then until I had a dream and received a revelation. Klee did not conceal anything. From the looks of it, I missed out on making huge contributions. Leonard, who had walked to the partition, chuckled.
Dunn nodded slightly as he instructed with a solemn expression. Get Klee to replace old Neil's watch of the armory.
Let old Neil and Fry come with us. Leonard stopped acting frivolous as he immediately informed Klee and Fry who were in the Nighthawk's entertainment room. One of them was a sleepless and the other was a corpse collector. 5 minutes later, the two-wheeled carriage that came under the jurisdiction of the Nighthawks began driving down the sparse streets in the morning. Leonard wore a feather hat, a shirt and a vest. He stood in as the carriage driver, lashing out a whip from time to time, sending out a crisp crack. Inside the carriage, Klee and old Neil sat on one side. Facing them were Smith and Fry. The corpse collector's skin was so white it looked like it either had not been under the sun in a very long while or he had a severe blood deficiency. He looked to be in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes. He had a high nose bridge and his lips were very thin. He had a cold and dark demeanor and had a faint smell from often touching corpses. Repeat the situation again in detail. Dunn adjusted the collar of his black windbreaker. Klee stroked the hanging topaz in his sleeve as he began from their mission commissioning until the dream. By the side, old Neil chuckled. Your fate seems to be entwined with that Antigonus family's notebook.
I never expected you to meet it in such a manner.
That's right. Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Thankfully, Leonard just mentioned that there was no indication of hidden factions of mysterious powers at play from the preliminary investigations of Elliot's kidnapping. It was solely a crime motivated by money. Otherwise, I would really suspect if someone had deliberately arranged for this to happen. Klee found the situation rather curious. It was too coincidental.
Dunn did not express his ideas as he was in deep thought.
Likewise, corpse collector Fry maintained his silence in his black windbreaker. Only when the carriage stopped at the building mentioned by Klee was the silence broken. Let's go up. Klee, you and old Neil walk behind. Be careful, very careful.
Dunn got off the carriage and pulled out a strange revolver with a clearly long and thick barrel.
He stuffed it into his right pocket. All right. Klee did not dare take point. After Leonard found someone to watch the carriage, the 5 Beyonders walked orderly into the building. With very light footsteps, they arrived at the 3rd floor. Is this the place? Leonard pointed at the apartment opposite the kidnappers. Klee tapped his glabella twice and activated his spirit vision. In this state, his spiritual perception was enhanced again.
He found the door familiar as if he had once entered it before.
Yes. He nodded in affirmation. Old Neil also activated his spiritual perception and after observing carefully, he said, There's no one inside, nor are there any spiritual glows of magic. Corpse collector Fry added with his hoarse voice. There aren't any evil spirits. He could see many spiritual bodies, including evil spirits and restless wraiths, even without activating his spirit vision. Leonard took a step forward and, like yesterday, punched the door's lock. This time not only did the surrounding wood shatter, even the door lock flew and fell noisily to the ground. Klee seemed to feel an invisible seal instantly vanish. Immediately following that, he caught a whiff of an intense stench. Corpse, a rotting corpse, Fry described coldly. He did not appear to suffer from nausea. Dunn reached out his black-gloved right hand and pushed open the door slowly. The first thing that they saw was a chimney. For early July, there was an abnormal heat emanating the room. In front of the chimney was a rocking chair. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Her head hung low. Her body was abnormally large. Her skin was blackish-green and swollen. It felt like she would explode from a simple prod, spewing a foul rotting stench from within. As maggots and other parasites squirmed between her flesh, blood, and rotting juices, or clothes and wrinkles, they appeared like points of light in spirit vision. They seemed to cling close to an extinguished darkness. Pa, pa. The old woman's eyeballs dropped to the floor and rolled a few times, leaving behind a yellowish-brown streak. Klee felt disgusted and being unable to tolerate the putrid stench any longer, he bent over and puked. Chapter 46. Portrait You. Klee squatted there, vomiting involuntarily. He was soon done with his puking since he did not eat breakfast. At that moment, a tin-colored square flask that looked like a cigarette box appeared in front of him. The mouth, which had lost its stopper, emitted a mixture of smells akin to tobacco, disinfectant, and mint leaves. It cleared up Klee's nose and rejuvenated him. The pungent smell continued to linger, but Klee no longer felt nauseous. He soon stopped vomiting. He traced the tiny flask up and saw a pale hand that did not seem to belong to a member of the living. He saw the mouth of a black windbreaker sleeve and saw corpse collector Fry with his cold and dark bearing. "Thank you." Klee recovered completely, and with his hands on his knees, he stood back up. Fry nodded without any expression. "It'll be fine once you are used to it." He put back the flask stopper and put it into his pocket and turned around, walking to the highly decomposed corpse. Without gloves, he began examining the old woman. As for Dunn Smith and Leonard Mitchell, they paced slowly around the room, occasionally touching the table's surface or newspapers. Old Neil pinched his nose and stood outside the door, grumbling in a muffled voice, "Seriously gross. I'm going to request for additional pay this month." Dunn turned his head over and touched the wall beside the chimney with his gloved right hand. While doing so, he asked Klee, "Does this place look familiar?" Klee held his breath and constructed the silver pocket watch in his mind to calm down. With him already in his spirit vision state, he immediately felt different. A scene that came from the deepest recesses of his memories flashed past his eyes. Chimney, rocking chair, table, newspapers, the rusty nails on the door, the tin cans inlaid with silver. The scenes were dark and dull, like a documentary from Earth. However, it was even more blurry and illusory. The scene quickly stacked against what Klee was seeing. The feelings of déjà vu and having been here before presented themselves clearly. An illusory and ethereal scream seemed to pass through invisible walls. "Hornasis. Phlegria. Hornasis. Phlegria. Hornasis. Phlegria. It feels a little familiar." Klee answered honestly while his brain felt a stabbing pain. Thankfully, he quickly tapped his glabella twice. "Hornasis. The Hornasis mountain range that appeared in original Klee's diary? That is content that was deciphered from the Antigonus family's notebook. The murmurs were very similar to one of the previous ones. It involved the word Hornasis. Is this a form of enticement? Klee was gripped by shock as he did not dare think deeper, afraid that he would place himself on the trajectory of losing control. Dunn nodded slightly and walked to a cupboard. He suddenly reached out his hand and pulled open its wooden door. The bread inside was moldy and there were about 7 gray, stiff dead rats. "Leonard, go downstairs to get patrolling cops and explain the situation here," instructed Dunn. "All right." Leonard turned and left the apartment. Following that, Dunn opened the door to 2 other bedrooms and did a careful search. After being certain that there were no clues as well as any sign of the Antigonus family's notebook, Fry also stood up. He wiped his hands with a white handkerchief he brought along with him and said, "The time of death was more than 5 days ago. There are no external injuries nor are there any clear signs that it was a result of beyonder powers. The exact cause of death will require a post-mortem." "Did you discover anything?" Dunn turned to look at old Neil and Klee. The two who were no longer in spirit vision state shook their heads in unison. "Apart from the corpse, everything else is normal." "Actually, no. There was an invisible energy sealing the apartment in the beginning. As you know, there will usually be similar processes when we use ritualistic magic." Old Neil thought for a few seconds before adding. Dunn was just about to say something when he looked outside the door. A few seconds later, Klee and old Neil sensed something and turned to look at the stairwell. A few seconds later, faint footsteps grew louder as Leonard walked up with a policeman. The policeman's expression changed once he caught the noxious smell. He immediately cooperated with his colleague from the Special Operations Department and began knocking on the doors of the residents on the 2nd floor to gain an understanding of the situation on the 3rd floor. Moments later, the corporal with his 2 silver chevrons looked at the corpse on the rocking chair. Katie Stephania Bieber, between 55 and 60 years old. Widow. Has rented this apartment with her son, Ray Bieber, for more than 10 years. Her husband was formerly a gem artisan. Her son is about 30 years old and is single. He inherited his father's trade and earns about £1.15 solely a week. According to their neighbors, they have not seen them in more than a week. Before the policeman continued, Klee already knew the critical point that followed. Missing.
To be more precise, it was unknown where Ray Bieber had gone to. The ancient notebook could very well be on him. Do you have a picture of Ray Bieber? Dunn looked at the police officer. He was acting as the role of a high-ranking inspector. However, it was not really acting since he was indeed a high-ranking inspector on the police department's roster. His salary and various allowances were also paid according to his rank. Of course, it did not include his salary from the church. The police officer shook his head nervously and said, "I'm not sure. I'll have to return to the station to search for it. It's not typical for us to have pictures of every single person." Got it. Continue questioning the residents on the first floor. Ask them in detail. Dunn gave the order. As he watched the police officer leave, he closed the door and turned to old Neil. "I'll leave the rest to you. If not, we will have to make all the residents sleep and obtain Ray Bieber's looks. Yeah, I don't really trust sketches based on verbal descriptions." Old Neil nodded. He took out a few thumb-sized bottles from a pocket in his black classic robe and scattered the liquids in a particular order. Immediately following that, he pulled out a clump of powder and scattered it in a circle around him. Strangely, a biting smell spread and was not influenced by the nauseating smells in the room. Klee also suddenly noticed that there was an invisible force field around him. It separated him from the environment and everyone else. It was like the room in its previous state. Old Neil half closed his eyes as his lips mumbled a soft and indiscernible incantation. Without being prepared, Klee vaguely heard the words, "Goddess, give me strength. We look forward to the protection of the night, hum." A sudden wind tore through the windows and blew up the powder. Klein's heart quaked suddenly as he felt goosebumps all over him. He found it difficult to describe. A terrifying smell that made him afraid of looking directly spread rapidly. He was confused as he tensed up, unable to relax. It felt as though he had plunged into a state similar to what one would have after working on a highly advanced mathematical problem. Suddenly, old Neil's eyes opened, his eyes pitch black. He took out a fountain pen from his pocket and began drawing on a piece of scrap paper on the table. He was so fast that his entire body was trembling. Klee focused his gaze and saw a face with recessed eyes and a tall nose bridge rapidly appear. When the natural curly short hair was done, old Neil wrote a single line beneath the portrait. Black hair, deep blue eyes. Left of his mouth is a fully ceramic tooth implant. Pada. The fountain pen in old Neil's hand fell onto the paper as his body convulsed a few times. This is the image of Ray Bieber according to what's left in the room. Old Neil whispered as the color of his eyes restored rapidly. Then, he turned back to his original spot and slowly circled it. The invisible force field that isolated things immediately dissipated in the form of a breeze. Praise the lady. Old Neil tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. Klein's taut nerves relaxed as he made more acute observations. He discovered that there was nothing special about Ray Bieber's facial features. He had a relatively mild bearing. The only thing was that his philtrum sagged clearly. I'll try using dowsing rod seeking. He picked up the portrait and found male clothes in the bedroom and spread them onto the ground. Dunn, Leonard, and old Neil did not stop him as they watched him place the black cane above the clothes and portrait. Fry was as silent as always. Klein's eyes turned from brown to black as he finished his recitation, only to release his grip. The black cane stood silently like it was embedded in the ground. Ray Bieber's location. Klein silently repeated to himself again. With the sound of humming wind, the cane fell down but kept changing directions while falling. Finally, it began spinning in slight circles. Without any external help, the black cane stood stably again. Klein repeated a few times with the same outcome. All he could do was shake his head at Dunn and old Neil. A strange power was interfering with his divination. Dunn took off his black glove and said to Leonard and Klein, "Take Ray Bieber's portrait and inquire the residents for a final confirmation. Following that, we will issue a warrant of arrest against him for the murder of his mother." All right. Klein held his cane and bent down to pick the portrait. After the neighbors confirmed that the portrait was indeed Ray Bieber, Dunn instructed Leonard and the police officer to finish the procedures at the station. He and Fry headed to a few bars in Tingen City to seek help via other means. Klein and old Neil returned to Blackthorn Security Company on a public carriage. It was not even 8 by the time they arrived. Rosen had not even clocked in. After closing the door, Klein cocked his head at old Neil and, hoping to learn and answer his questions, asked him, "Why would I send the Antigonus family's notebook to Ray Bieber's home?"
This was completely in a different direction from Iron Cross Street where Welch stayed. Old Neil walked to the sofa and chuckled. Isn't that obvious? Who knows what powers inside the notebook you invoked? Maybe you did some described ritual out of curiosity and ended up provoking a strange existence that you should not have. The motive of this existence was to have the notebook sent to Ray Bieber and sever all clues, to prevent anyone from discovering it. Therefore, apart from you who were selected, Welch and Naya committed suicide. Regarding you, to be frank, I still have no idea how you survived. I would like to know too. Klee sat down as well as he deliberately replied with a wry smile. I've also thought of the guesses you have of the proceedings. However, there's one thing I don't understand. Why did I have to hand the notebook to Ray Bieber? Old Neil shrugged and said, perhaps his life path number matches the requirements, or maybe he's one of the last remaining descendants of the Antigonus family. In short, there are too many possibilities. And why the notebook was sold to Tingen City would have similar reasons. I do not think it's because he's a descendant. Klee suddenly felt enlightened before he sighed. Unfortunately, I did not discover immediately that Ray Bieber and that notebook have vanished. Old Neil laughed. This is something that Dunn has to worry about. As for you, it's something good. Why do you say so? Klee frowned in puzzlement. Chapter 47. Old Neil's lack of money. Old Neil rubbed his temples and said, I believe we have a general idea of why the three of you engaged in a mass suicide. That notebook is also now purportedly in Ray Bieber's hands. Furthermore, the matter has already been exposed. Regardless of whether you are alive or dead, it will hardly influence any subsequent developments. I believe that the surreptitious existence or mysterious power that caused all of this will not pay you any special attention. It's just like how you would not pay attention to the ants on the ground. Heh. As long as you do not try to make him recall you. And our arrest warrant for Ray Bieber will quickly reach the secret order. They will also be able to guess that it is related to the Antigonus family's notebook. Believe me, for a secret organization that has been in existence for more than 1,000 years, it has many channels of information. Therefore, their focus will be diverted to Ray Bieber's whereabouts, in a bid to find the notebook before us. They will not, nor is it possible for them to harass, stalk, or deal with you. Lad, congratulations on stepping out from the shadows of the past. What follows will be a brand new journey filled with sunlight. Klee nodded when he heard that as he said in a happy and relieved manner, I hope so. Having transmigrated here, he had been enveloped in uncertainty. Now, it felt like it had finally dissipated. However, Klee was still feeling uncertain because the notebook seemed to be tied to him in a certain manner. It went to the point of him bumping into remnant clues coincidentally from a normal mission of rescuing a hostage. He was afraid that there would come a day when a delivery man would send him a parcel, only to realize that it was that Antigonus family notebook after opening it up. Let's hope everything will go as Old Neil described. He silently prayed. When Old Neil heard his reply, he immediately scoffed. You don't seem to be a devout believer of the goddess. At this moment, shouldn't you be drawing the sign of the crimson moon at your chest and say, May Goddess bless us? Mr. Neil, you don't seem like one either. A real devotee would not say, what follows will be a brand new journey filled with sunlight. Having been studying mysticism under Old Neil, Klee had established a decent friendship with him, so he did not stand on ceremony to return a sarcastic remark. Both of them locked eyes and chuckled with great rapport. At the same time, they tapped their chests 4 times. Praise the lady. At that moment, they heard the grinding sounds of machinery as the main door to Blackthorn Security Company opened. The elegant Mrs. Oriana with her fashionably coiled hair stepped into the reception hall with a light green dress. Good morning, Mr. Neil. Good morning, Klee. She held a small leather handbag as she greeted with a smile. It's another fabulous day today. A pretty good day. Good morning, Oriana. You are still as beautiful as 10 years ago, replied Old Neil with a chuckle. Oriana's eyes turned to slits as she upturned her face. Mr. Neil, the way you praise is still as infuriating as 10 years ago. She enunciated the words 10 years. Is that so? Old Neil looked at Klee, confused. He wore a perplexed look. Never mention anything that will remind the ladies of their age. As a keyboard warrior that knew a little of everything, Klee instantly understood what had peeved Mrs. Oriana. He smiled lightly and said, Good morning, Mrs. Oriana. You are as beautiful as always. Thank you, Our outstanding Koei University graduate. Oriana smiled with a nod before saying, "That old butler has already paid the mission's commission. According to Captain's rules, half of it will be used as additional funds, while the other half will be split between you and Leonard. But since you aren't a formal member, you can only take 10% of the half. Come over later to sign for it." "How much did he pay?" Klein asked happily while also feeling the pinch. £200. This was what he said back then. Lord, the esteemed Storm. I never imagined or believed that this was resolved just like that. This is even harder than us having a dream. Why is your security company so unknown? It's an insult to the entire industry. Mrs. Oriana mimicked the old butler's southern accent. Klein thought seriously for a few seconds before saying humorously, "This is just too unfair for those kidnappers." Two Beyonders had resolved the problem quickly using methods that could be described as easy and pleasant. This is like an adult bullying a few kids while in full combat attire. They were just too unlucky. They must have lost the protection of the divine, said Oriana with a soft laugh. I told the butler that we were only lucky. One of our informants happened to see the kidnappers bring the child into the hideout. Therefore do not have too much hopes for us. We really are just a very ordinary security company. Typically speaking, the more you emphasize something as ordinary, the more extraordinary it is. Klein lampooned with a smile. He watched Mrs. Oriana walk through the partition and enter the accounting room. Old Neil puckered his lips by the side and said enviously, "You really are a lucky lad. You haven't joined us for long and you've encountered a job worth £200. Is that very rare?" Klein asked in puzzlement. Prior to this, he was either studying history or mysticism, or wandering aimlessly outside, hoping to find clues with his spiritual perception. According to Oriana's accounts, we might not encounter a single job an entire week. And most jobs are worth less than £20. Old Neil rubbed the moonstone by his wrist and sighed. Following that, he looked at Klein with anticipation. If you encounter any similar jobs in the future, remember to inform me. Upon hearing old Neil's words, Klein suddenly felt a strange feeling arise in him. Therefore he asked directly, "Mr. Neil, you seem to be lacking in money. How much do you get paid a week? If you aren't comfortable telling me, just ignore my question." Old Neil leaned back into the sofa and chuckled. "This isn't something that needs hiding. I've been here for so many years. At present, I will obtain salaries from both the church and the police department every week. A total of £12. A weekly salary of £12? Klein blurted out in surprise. A weekly salary of £12 with 52 weeks a year. That meant more than £600 a year. Back when he read the Tianjin Morning Post and Honest paper, they had mentioned that high-profile lawyers only earned £800 to £1,000 a year. And those were the best lawyers. As for the managers of Benson's trading company, they only earned £6 a week. That was already quite a decent job. Yes, such a salary is actually quite generous, and we do not need to pay any taxes, added old Neil with a smile. Klein had heard from Benson that one had to pay E-type taxes when their weekly salaries exceeded £1. In other words, the government and corporate employees had to pay 3% of taxes if they earned £1 to £2, 5% for £2 to £5, 10% for £5 to £10, and 15% for £10 to £20, capping at 20% for those above £20. Other than that, he also read of 4 other kinds of taxes on the newspapers. A-type was related to land, housing, and other earnings from material items. It included property and rent. B-type was a tax paid by farmers. C-type was a tax on profits from bonds, funds, and equities. D-type was commercial, finance, or professional income. It's something admirable. Klein echoed old Neil. However, old Neil shook his head. Such a salary is insufficient for Beyonders like us who have to frequently study the hidden mysteries, practice and attempt rituals. Aren't materials obtainable via application? Asked Klein in puzzlement. Old Neil scoffed. There's a limitation to it. At times, we have to give a sufficient legitimate reason. If you want to learn more and experiment in the field of mysticism, you can only spend your own dime to buy materials. It can be bought internally or at underground markets. Klein jolted in surprise as he immediately asked, "There are Beyonder materials that are sold in underground markets? I thought the churches would not permit their existence?" He was lacking in means to obtain materials. With him having a mysterious organization in its nascent stages, he could not always have them settled via the Nighthawks, right?
There's no way to control such matters. Yeah, from the viewpoint of mysticism, all beings are sentient with their spirits and they stem from the same source. The materials we use are not limited to those extraordinary creatures. It also comes from ordinary animals, plants, and minerals. For example, the poison hemlock, gold mint leaves, and night vanilla in the bottle of seer potion. They are items we can encounter frequently in our daily lives. They might not have any extraordinary characteristics, but they have special characteristics. Through concoction and blending, they will derive certain effects. Therefore, this is not a trade that the church can ban, explained old Neil in detail. Without waiting for Klee to say a word, he continued, besides, it's not only the core of extraordinary beings that are of use. For example, the Lavos squid. Apart from its blood, its eyeballs, skin, and tentacles are pretty good materials. Unless the church captures it entirely with its own manpower, to completely corner and control any outflows would be a tremendous financial burden. The lower the grade of the extraordinary material, the more it is so. They can only do their best to prevent the more special materials from flowing out. Old Neil suddenly laughed. There's another important reason. It's better to know of an underground market than not knowing of it. Under the premise that secret organizations have not been fully eliminated, this is a pretty good strategy. Besides, it can help us obtain materials we are lacking. Of course, with the existence of such markets, contraband items will appear. As long as it's not something ridiculous or overly dangerous, we will turn a blind eye to it. At most, we would use them to enrich our vaults. Is it because the few large churches put each other in place, so no one can take excessive action? Klee guessed. Old Neil acknowledged tersely but did not elaborate. I'm a seer. In the future, I'll definitely need to practice and will need more materials. Mr. Neil, can you take me to the underground market to have a look? Klee requested with a valid reason. Old Neil appeared to be placed in a difficult position. In fact, those guys who are active in those places are mostly not beyonders. Some of them might be aristocrats that like mystery or rich people who have inclinations towards mysticism. All right. I have a 30-pound bill that needs paying soon. It wouldn't be convenient for me to head over there for the time being. All right. Klee never expected the reason to be old Neil's owing of money. Moments later he said with deliberation, Mr. Neil, do you need me to lend you money? I just earned a commission of £10. Haha, there's no need. I'll be able to settle it. Old Neil patted the sofa and slowly stood up. Sigh. Age is truly an enemy that biological creatures can't fight. I'm exhausted from last night's watch. Yeah, revise what I've taught you later this morning. Read more documents. Tomorrow, I'll teach you the foundations of ritualistic magic. All right. Klee got up and bade him farewell by taking off his hat. When Captain Dunn did not return at noon, Klee pretended that he was still searching for the notebook as he roamed the streets again. Having earned £10, he no longer needed to wait for the next disbursement of the funds. He could head directly to the divination club. Cogitation and spirit vision have been occasionally producing murmurings and illusions. It made him eager to begin acting. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.